Our story begins on the Lunar New Year, a national holiday in South Korea. Some distant relatives visit a family, and a son-in-law helps the daughter-in-law with the bags. Later, inside the house, the hosts prepare the food, while the elders watch a video of a newborn baby. They are extremely excited to see the child taking their first steps and saying their first words. The one in charge of preparing the meal is our protagonist, Han Jia, 32 years old, currently a freelancer without a registered job. In other words, unemployed. Therefore, she helps with household tasks. Her mother tries to show her the video of the baby, but she says she's seen it so many times she's already memorized what the baby does. Still, her mother remains charmed by the baby's cuteness. While Han Jia prepares the food, her father sneaks a taste, and angrily, she says that if they won't help, they shouldn't get in the way, much less eat without cutlery. She says that if they're in such a hurry, they should cook for themselves, pointing out that there are 3 people there and only she is doing all the work alone. Her mother reminds her that she said she wanted to live with them forever and needs to at least do this much since she's just sleeping in their house. Her father agrees with her mother completely and says that if she finds it unfair, she should find a partner. However, Han Jia sneaks away to answer the door, avoiding the conversation. As soon as she opens the door, the visitors enter, and the child runs straight to their grandmother. Young, the child's father, asks how they are. They say they're fine and ask about the traffic. Jimin, the mother, is so tired she's having leg cramps. Her husband immediately tells her to sit so he can massage her legs. Han Jia goes to greet her younger sister, telling her she hasn't seen her in a while and missed her. Along with that, she offers a flowery apron she prepared for her to wear. Her sister says she looks fine, even wearing just an apron, and remarks that it would be great if she could get her to eat wedding noodles this year. In South Korea, newlyweds serve noodles at their wedding to guests, a tradition meant to bless single people with marriage. Han Jia insists her sister put on the apron, even though she hesitates. She takes a slightly aggressive older sister stance and says if her younger sister doesn't wear it, she'll kill her. However, Han Jia quickly gets a smack from her mother, who scolds her for not being able to drop her awful attitude. The protagonist complains, saying she's doing everything alone and wanted to split the chores and shifts, accusing her mother of going easy on the younger daughter. Her sister's husband steps in to defend her, telling his sister-in-law not to act that way and pointing out that she's going through a tough time. Han Jia's mother asks if they're planning on having a third child. Jimin isn't sure yet but thinks they might. Han Jia's father asks why she's standing there doing nothing and tells her to get to work. After a while, she steps outside to smoke a cigarette. She doesn't seem very happy with the situation. She remembers when her sister mentioned meeting one of Young's brothers, noting that the age difference between them wasn't very large. Han Jia concludes that he didn't seem like a scumbag, but someone appears, overhearing her words, and comments that she's as rude as ever. When she looks at the man, she doesn't recognize him. However, seeing what he's holding, she wonders why someone is eating a chicken breast in a smoking area. Han Jia apologizes but asks who he is. The man doesn't understand why she doesn't recognize him. He says he's Jin Minchul, the guy who used to live near the door and always wore headphones. Han Jia doubts she really knows him and tries to remember someone by that name, but as soon as she remembers, gets startled and lets out a loud scream. She realizes that Jin Minchul is that slouch boy who was always playing on a portable video game, but his appearance has changed a lot. Han Jia says she almost didn't recognize him and furthermore, mentions that she thought he was crazy for eating chicken in a smoking area. He asks if that's forbidden. However, Han Jia says it's just weird and tells him to eat at home. The young man says he would, but his family insisted he eat the holiday food. But he got worried about the calories and decided to eat something healthier. This makes the protagonist think he's crazy. She realizes they are the same age, and have lived in the same complex since they were kids, so they started getting along by chance, though she claims Jin Minchul isn't exactly her friend. She remembers him during school days, thinking that in her class, there were 1 or 2 people who didn't get along with the rest. A shy boy who couldn't even pretend to know her, even though they lived in the same neighborhood. Or maybe, should she say that she had a certain interest in him? Thinking about it leaves her uncertain. Soon she wonders why she's thinking about the past now of all times. She concludes that she is now an ugly duckling with nowhere to go. In other words, a single unemployed woman. Thinking about it, she notices that Jin Minchul has changed a lot and wonders if Soul's water works miracles because he has become quite a man. Jin Minchul is a programmer at a medium-sized, well-known company. He's currently an assistant manager and just wants to eat and live well. This makes Han Jia realize that something is wrong. She is an expert at not realizing her shortcomings, lives with her parents, and only because she has nowhere else to go, her current wish is for the ground to swallow her up by the next day. Compared to Jin Minchul, she notices he is in a much better situation than she is. This makes her so sad she wants to bite her tongue and die, thinking that even now, God would forgive her, and she even considers saying goodbye to her parents. However, Jean Mincheol starts a conversation with her and asks how she's been. She says she hasn't done anything special and returns the question, thinking there's nothing about her that suggests she's led a good life. Jean Mincheol, on the other hand, says he just leads a moderate life, working, exercising, playing a bit, and doing household chores. But to the protagonist, that seems like the pinnacle of life, and that he is living life to the fullest, not something moderate. However, Jean Mincheol doesn't seem to agree much. Being honest, he admits he used to think that way too, but it doesn't seem that way to some adults. For some time now, his parents' complaints have only gotten worse. They keep saying things like he's getting older and will never get married, and he thinks marriage isn't something he can do on his own. Not only that, but now they've tried signing him up for a marriage information center. With the registration fee, he thinks he could buy several games instead. Anyway, he says Hanja seems fine, at least better off than he is. The protagonist says her family is very close, even closer than she would like. Soon, she makes a proposal to Jean Mincheol, saying they should just get married. Jean Mincheol is confused, as it came out of nowhere. The protagonist tries to justify herself, saying they both have problems because they're still unmarried, and that would be solved if they got married. However, in her thoughts, she concludes she must be crazy for suggesting that. But she continues, saying they're single and have nothing to lose, and with marriage, both would gain something. Jean Mincheol's serious face makes her nervous, and she asks why he's so serious, saying she can't even make a joke and has quite the talent for ruining the mood. However, her sweaty hands and interlocked fingers suggest otherwise. Her nervousness is blatantly obvious. What she didn't expect, though, is that Jean Mincheol would immediately agree and, not only that, but ask for her hand from her father in front of her entire family. Shortly after, they were at the altar, exchanging their wedding vows, and even went on a honeymoon, choosing a paradisiacal place for it. They even danced with some locals. After that, Jean Mincheol says that marriage is truly a wonderful thing, and he never thought this day would come. He steps out of the shower and asks if Hanja will shower as well. She replies that she will as soon as she finishes her drink. However, it still hasn't sunk in for her. The protagonist is extremely nervous about all of this, unlike Jean Mincheol, who already seems immersed in this new life. Thus, the two got married. On the first night of their honeymoon, Hanja could only stare at her passport and think about the fact that she was in a foreign country. This was something unbelievable for her. The protagonist even wonders if she's dreaming and tries to pinch herself to wake up, but the pain confirms that everything is real. Despite it all, no matter how much she thinks about it, it still feels very strange, because she really is married to Jean Mincheol. She sees him changing clothes and ends up noticing his six-pack and his super-toned arms, awakening something in her that she had never felt before. However, she thinks it's best to keep herself in check. Jean Mincheol asks what she's doing. The protagonist replies that she's going to sleep, and he tells her to go ahead. Curious, Hanja asks what he's doing, and Jean Mincheol says he's looking for something he can't seem to find. The protagonist asks what it is. He replies that it's something to make their night more peaceful. Hanja realizes he came prepared for the trip, but she's uncertain about what exactly this thing might be. The fact that he mentioned a peaceful night leaves her desperate and embarrassed about what it could be. Hanja thinks about him wearing cobalt blue, a color traditionally associated with the wedding night for representing love. She reflects that now they are married, there's no way around it, but still, this is natural for a couple. However, she doubts what she's thinking, concluding that this is all too sudden. Jean Mincheol tries to say something, but she panics and starts yelling, saying that her heart isn't ready for this. He doesn't understand her reaction and simply shows her what he was looking for, earplugs. Jean Mincheol explains that he doesn't usually snore, but when he's very tired, he does. He then goes to bed first, as he is really exhausted. Hanja feels embarrassed about the situation, but also somewhat relieved. She realizes that she, too, prepared a sleep mask, which she finds a bit odd. Nonetheless, she puts in the earplugs and lies down, thinking she couldn't have expected anything different from him. According to the protagonist, a honeymoon is something everyone, regardless of their preferences, dreams of at least once. But in some cases, it can be the starting point for the first marital conflict, so it should be taken seriously. On the morning of the second day of their honeymoon, Hanja didn't know what to do, as she was unsure of what to wear to attract good impressions. She considers wearing something exotic, local, and sophisticated, thinking that casual attire that doesn't make it obvious they're on a honeymoon would be best. In the middle of her deliberation, Jean Mincheol shows up and asks if she's ready. She responds that she's almost done. Jean Mincheol asks how much longer he'll have to wait. Looking at his outfit, Hanja says he must be crazy to be wearing something like that. He asks what's wrong with his clothes. Hanja replies that he is the problem and asks why he's wearing socks with sandals. Jean Mincheol says it's very comfortable. Besides, he argues, it doesn't matter because no one is going to see them. But the protagonist retorts that she can see it. adding that it's not the time to worry about the itinerary, and pulls him somewhere else. She drags Jin Mincheol to a clothing store, thinking that she said those things earlier, yet she herself isn't very confident, as she's hardly gone out in the past 2 years. Either way, he must come out looking better than before. No matter what he wears, she plans to just say it's fine and move straight to the itinerary. Shortly after, Jin Mincheol appears and asks if it's okay. She's about to say yes, but when she sees what he's wearing, she nearly has a meltdown. Jin Mincheol asks if it's not good enough, mentioning that he doubts he'll even get a car dressed like this. She realizes that for him, the clothes he wears follow the same concept as the defense mechanisms of animals, but she orders him to change immediately and dress like a normal human being. So he does, but when he puts on a different outfit, he's unsure if it's any better. Han Jia says it looks good, at least for her, so he should just leave it at that. With that, Jin Mincheol concludes that he'll dress like this from now on, and asks the salesperson for 7 sets of the same outfit he's currently wearing. But the protagonist tries to stop him. Jin Mincheol asks why, since she said it looked good. Han Jia simply asks what kind of life he's been living, adding that one does not buy the same set of clothes repeatedly, and she will choose others for him herself. Then, he must come back and try them on. Thus, Han Jia looks around the store and tries to pick something out for him. Meanwhile, Jin Mincheol gets distracted and looks at a bikini on a mannequin. He asks Han Jia if the next stop on their itinerary is the banana boat ride. She confirms that it is. Then he says that since Han Jia is choosing clothes for him, it's only fair that he picks swimwear for her, and asks what she thinks about the idea. Han Jia becomes extremely flustered upon hearing this, because she didn't expect Jin Mincheol to suggest something like that. Sometime later they leave the store. Han Jia carries a bag with the clothes, and wonders if Jin Mincheol really bought the swimsuit she picked out or just grabbed anything and handed it over. Jin Mincheol asked her to wear the swimsuit he chose, since Han Jia picked clothes for him. This makes sense to her, but the protagonist feels like she's missing something, because she imagined he wasn't the type of guy to do that, so it surprises her. When they arrive at the place for the ride, she goes to the women's restroom to change. Han Jia feels confused because Mincheol didn't even mention what type of swimsuit he bought. She herself saw several bold designs on the mannequins and feels worried, because she knows Jin Mincheol doesn't think much about such things, but it still makes her apprehensive. However, Han Jia is surprised when she sees the design he chose. Some time passes while she's in the fitting room, and after waiting anxiously, Jin Mincheol sees her approaching. As soon as the protagonist arrives, Jin Mincheol asks if she liked the design. He says it caught his attention when he saw it in the catalog because it's highly resistant to cold and water, allowing for better movement, which makes it quite impressive. Han Jia wants to ask a quick question and asks him to confirm if they are in the middle of a honeymoon. Jin Mincheol replies that they are. She then asks him to take a look around. She shows him all the other people, who are wearing conventional swimwear, and asks why he thinks those people are dressed that way. Jin Mincheol replies that it's due to the hot weather. The protagonist confirms this and asks if they're the only ones who didn't know that. She says she's speechless and asks what he planned to do wearing that, stating that she's so embarrassed she won't be able to enjoy herself. However, sometime later, she's already having fun, and managed to enjoy it to the fullest. By the way, the full-body swimsuit was very comfortable. Afterward, they went to a place to have lunch, and took the opportunity to snap some photos, including with the swimsuit she had initially hated. After completing half the day's itinerary, they walk along the sand, and Han Jia is super excited for the rest of the trip. But Jin Mincheol catches her attention and asks if she isn't tired because they can rest. However, she says they only have a few days left and still have much to do. Jin Mincheol then points out something on the back of her heel. When Han Jia checks, she notices her sandal is hurting her foot, and she hadn't even realized it. She insists she's fine and that it's just a scratch. However, Jin Mincheol disagrees and kneels down, telling her to get on because he'll carry her. The protagonist tries to talk about the rest of the itinerary, but Jin Mincheol says he can't think about that now, so he wants to go back and insists she climb on his back. So she does, and Jin Mincheol carries her. They make their way back across the sand. Han Jia asks if she's not too heavy, stating that she can walk on her own, but Jin Mincheol just says it's good exercise for him. She asks if he's lying. Jin Mincheol insists he's not, saying her weight is perfect for training. However, the protagonist doesn't like that and asks him to stop talking. As they walk, she thinks about how long it's been since the last time someone carried her on their back. Being carried makes her feel at ease. Out of nowhere, she decides to make a joke and blows on his ear. Jin Mincheol asks why she did that. Han Jia responds that she can do whatever she wants, and if he has any complaints, he should speak up now. The protagonist is having fun teasing him. She looks at the sky and enjoys the view, asking him to stop because she wants to take some photos. Jin Mincheol says they've already taken plenty, but she insists, saying these are different. So, he agrees to take the photo under the sunset. Later on her phone, Han-jia checks the photo and thinks it's strange, because her sister said they would argue a lot during their honeymoon, but the opposite happened. She thinks it's because they have only been married for a few days, and instead of fighting, it seems they are having several good moments together. Honestly, she had a lot of fun and hadn't felt like this in years, feeling so happy that she wished she could live there forever. Thinking about it, she recalls what happened earlier, when Jin Mincheol offered to carry her. The fact that he nonchalantly said her heel was hurt, and carried her on his back almost made her heart burst. His broad back and warmth made her feel that way, but somehow, she also felt comfortable. Still, she doesn't know why she is thinking about these things. Surprisingly, the fact that she had been so lonely made her happy when she had someone by her side. She just hasn't gotten used to the way Jin Mincheol sleeps, but she knows it costs a lot, so she thinks she has to be happy and enjoy it, because if she were to spend her money on a trip, it would only be fun if it were in Korea. Even so, she concludes that it wouldn't be so bad after all. Some time later, they returned to their country. After their honeymoon, which ended unexpectedly smoother than she had imagined, they managed to return home safely. Han-jia comes across a wonderful dish, and asks her mother what's going on, as the food looks more extravagant today. Her mother replies it's because of her return. She thanks her, but then asks about all the boxes and if they are moving. Her mother says only she will be moving to her husband's house. Han-jia is confused, but her mother reminds her that she said she would move to his house as soon as the honeymoon ended. Han-jia didn't even remember that, but she really did say it. She expected it to happen, but not so quickly. Her parents say they just want her to live well, and she thinks this is very sudden. Still, she ends up leaving their house and moving in with Jin Mincheol. After that, he calls her for a conversation and asks if she's ready to start. Jin Mincheol then hands her a list he prepared. Han-jia remembers that when she was young, there was a song she used to hum without realizing. Try, it's okay to make mistakes, because you're not an adult yet. She used to hum it mindlessly, but now she finally understands the meaning of the lyrics. The lyrics were trying to say that if you make a mistake as an adult, you're screwed. Even so, people can make mistakes in their lives. Han-jia feels that her life became too extreme because she said something wrong back then, when she suggested the marriage proposal. She just returned from her honeymoon, and was immediately kicked out by her parents. Now she ended up living with Mincheol, and he already wants to discuss a contract with her. Each of them must decide what they want to include in the document, and Han-jia becomes furious. Jin Mincheol asks what's wrong. She pretends and says she just has a bit of cramp in her hand. Looking at the document again, she wonders if this is really necessary. Jin Mincheol asks if she's done yet, and she replies that she hasn't. Then, without thinking too much, she writes on the contract, saying that whatever happens, happens. Each of them writes the clauses they would like and agrees to reveal them at the same time. So she does, showing what she wrote. Jin Mincheol wants her to stop smoking, not bother the brada, and speak up if she has any complaints. Han-jia wants him not to enter the room recklessly, not to force things, and that if anything happens, they should talk about it as much as possible. However, upon reading the first line, Han-jia realizes she will have to quit smoking and says that's too much to ask all of a sudden. Also saying that even her father failed to make her quit, stating it's not about quitting smoking but about gaining suffering for the rest of her life. But Jin Mincheol says he can't stand the smell of cigarettes, and that she could at least stop for a while, claiming she's never had to reduce anything, which is why she's not used to it. Then, Han-jia asks what this rada is. Immediately, Jin Mincheol realizes he hadn't mentioned it before, and Han-jia is startled. She asks if something just touched her feet, and he replies that it did. Han-jia realizes it's something furry. But when she looks, she sees that it's a cat. Jin Mincheol says that Rada is intelligent because she showed up immediately when they were talking about her. The protagonist asks if the cat's name is Rada. He confirms, saying that cats love mice, so that's the reason for the name. Following that logic, Han-jia says she loves chicken feet and asks if she should call herself Han Chicken Feet. However, Jin Mincheol simply says that Rada is the owner of the house. Speaking on behalf of the cat, he introduces her to Han-jia and says she will be under her care. The protagonist feels awkward and says he didn't even mention that he had a pet. Jin Mincheol says he didn't know he would end up living with her and asks if she dislikes cats. However, Han-jia replies that's not the case. He shows his cat more closely and asks if she hates her. Upon seeing the cat's face, the protagonist is speechless, because she finds the animal very cute. So, she states that she likes cats, which makes Jin Mincheol happy. He asks if Jia would like to hold her, and says that Rada is very gentle. Han-jia holds Rada, and the cat feels very comfortable. Then, Han-jia wants to clear up another doubt, and asks what he would do if she said she hated cats or was allergic. Would he try to kick her out of his house? Jin Mincheol looks at her seriously, and replies that he wouldn't do that, but would instead place Rada in a separate house. After that, she asks about money, but Jin Minchul replies that it's not an issue. He says he knows it's in the contract not to disturb her, but now that they're married, she trusts him and has left her parents' house. So, the least he can do is take care of that part. The protagonist concludes that Jin Minchul has thought about many aspects of marriage, more than she imagined. Honestly, she didn't think the same way he did, but after talking a bit, they both agreed on the contents of the contract. It was agreed that Jia should return 10 minutes after smoking, not disturb Rada, not enter each other's rooms, and not interfere in each other's private lives. Lastly, they should seek a conversation if there's something to complain about. Han Jia asks if there are any objections to this, and Jin Minchul says he forgot something. She asks what it is. He says that this marriage contract can be cancelled by either party at any time. The protagonist seems to agree with this, because she wanted this condition from the beginning. The marriage contract is strictly based on mutual interest between the parties and can be terminated immediately by either party. Thus, they stamp the document. This is a contract. For the protagonist, the first lie for them is that they are still not mature enough to be forgiven by society. After signing, Jin Minchul calls her attention, and says that from now on, he will be under her care, extending his hand. Han Jia likes this gesture, and says that she will also be under this playful contract. No one knew, but this would make them laugh until they cried, and that's how they signed. Contrary to the protagonist's concerns, she spent her first night at his house without any issues. She did some online shopping, realizing that furniture is more expensive than she thought. However, she feels she bought everything she needed. It seems she'll only be able to organize things once everything arrives, and since Jin Minchul will start working the next day, there's nothing else for her to do. Han Jia lies down and says the blanket her mother gave her is very comfortable, so she thinks about sleeping. But she starts imagining that, from now on, she will live there. With that, she can't believe she is actually married and has to live there instead of her parents' house. For her, this means that Jin Minchul is in the next room. Even though it's common for Korean couples to sleep in separate rooms, for them, it's not the same thing. That's why the protagonist thinks she should have experienced living with someone unrelated before, so she wouldn't have to go through this now. Soon, she feels so nervous that, at this rate, she might not sleep well. But the night comes for her, and nothing stops her from sleeping. Her sleep is so heavy that she lies as if in a crime scene position. The next day, Jin Minchul wakes up first, and prepares something to eat. While the sleepyhead shows no signs of waking up, he continues cooking the food. Sometime later, Han Jia gets up and asks what the noise is in the middle of the night, since she didn't even realize it was already morning. Jin Minchul apologizes for the noise, saying he's not used to her living there, and says he's preparing breakfast as usual. And since she's awake, he invites her to eat together. Jia says that since Jin Minchul is taking care of her, she will definitely accept. The protagonist notices that, besides having a job, Jin Minchul also makes his own breakfast, thinking that he is surprisingly active, and that she should watch his cooking skills to learn a bit. However, she sees that he simply threw some ingredients into a blender, and made a chicken breast protein shake. With the shake cup in front of her, Han Jia asks what it is, and Jin Minchul replies that it's breakfast. She then asks if he calls that a meal, and Jin Minchul says he does. The protagonist decides she'll at least give it a try, but finds the taste of the shake disgusting. Then Jia asks if that's all he has for breakfast. Jin Minchul says no, and hands her a protein bar. Angrily, she throws the bar on the floor, and says Jin Minchul must be joking, demanding a normal breakfast. Even cereal would do. He asks if protein bars aren't normal, but Han Jia says he isn't normal. The protagonist says that he goes to work and eats something delicious without her, so there's no issue in eating this for breakfast, claiming he's stingy for doing so. But Minchul shows her his lunchbox, which contains only chicken breast, sweet potatoes, and other vegetables. Immediately, Jia remembers him eating chicken breast during the Lunar New Year holiday, thinking that Minchul isn't a normal human being. There's no way he can eat only this all the time. So, she goes to check his fridge, and sees that's exactly what he always eats. With that, the protagonist falls back, saying she'll never complain about her mom's cooking again, and will accept whatever her mom offers her from now on. Minchul asks if there's nothing she can eat. Jia replies there are plenty of things she eats, and that just looking at his food already makes her feel healthier. Then, Minchul asks why she doesn't eat soup and rice. Han Jia asks if she can really eat that by herself. Minchul doesn't understand the question and says she can, stating that what he eats is enough for him, but she doesn't need to force herself to like eating the same thing he does and can eat whatever she wants. Thus, Jia feels stupid for the scene she made at breakfast, because she knows that even if her mom had to scold her, she would still make her eat breakfast with the family. And so, she got used to it. Right after that, she sees Minchul leaving and asks if he's already going to work. He says yes, it's already time. With that, the protagonist says goodbye, and Jin Minchul notices something different. The protagonist asks if he doesn't like the fact that he has to go to work while she spends the day at home. But Jean Mincheol says that's not it. She then asks what's with his look, stating that she's also looking for a job, as it's her first day after moving. So, she doesn't want to be humiliated. Jean Mincheol insists it's not that. She then tells him to be careful on his way, and that she'll see him in the evening. A bit uncomfortable, Jean Mincheol says goodbye. As he leaves, Han Jia watches him, and as soon as he closes the door, Jia says she was joking about getting a job. Now she's going to enjoy her new routine as much as she can, and do so before the money in her bank account runs out. Outside, a couple walks down the street, and a man in a car sighs, saying he envies them. After that, he hears a noise, and realizes Jean Mincheol is outside. He greets him as assistant manager Jean and says it's been a while. Jean Mincheol gets into his coworker's car. His coworker, Choy Sanhua, says he's surprised. Mincheol asks about what. Choy Sanhua says it's about him taking 10 days off after the holiday. Jean Mincheol had already spoken with the CEO about it, sent him a vacation request by email, and got approval. Then, Choy Sanhua received his call during the holiday and found it strange because the company offers Mincheol vacation days, and he always refused. So, Choy Sanhua asks why he changed his mind, as there must be an explanation. He knows his colleague is unpredictable, but he didn't expect this. However, he sees Mincheol smiling, and asks if something good happens since it's rare to see him smile. Jean Mincheol hesitates to respond. He remembers Han Jia saying goodbye to him earlier, telling him to be careful on the road. Made him smile, because he says having someone waiting at home is really a nice thing. Choy Sanhua agrees but feels a bit confused, and asks who is waiting for his colleague at home. Jean Mincheol replies his wife. With this surprising response, his colleague nearly crashes the car. He is shocked to hear Jean Mincheol mention a wife, and asks if it's a reference to a game or something. However, Jean Mincheol responds that it's a real wife, because he got married last week. Soon, someone in the back seat is also surprised. A woman who can't believe what she just heard. She immediately starts asking questions about it. When they arrive at the company building, the other colleagues have similar reactions, congratulating Jean Mincheol on his marriage. He says he bought some souvenirs during his trip and tells them to pick their favorites. One of them then comments that Mincheol has become more human since getting married. They also ask why they weren't invited. Jean Mincheol explains that it was a sudden wedding and was only celebrated with their respective families. In a hurry, Choy Sanhua says he hasn't finished writing a code, and bids farewell to the others to get to work because he wants to finish it today no matter what. However, So Sooyun calls him in a rather sinister tone, asking to speak with him briefly, in a more private place. The woman puts Choy Sanhua in a headlock, and he says he gives up and hasn't done anything wrong. But So Sooyun is extremely furious with him. She says Choy Sanhua told her that Mincheol wasn't interested in anyone, and asks how he ended up getting married. Choy Sanhua doesn't know how to respond, and says it doesn't make sense to him either, since he never thought Mincheol would get married. Before the vacation, he didn't even imagine his colleague had a girlfriend and thought he wasn't interested in women at all. So Sooyun is unsure, but Choy insists that a guy who doesn't drink alcohol and is obsessed with fitness didn't seem interested not just in women but in any human being at all. So Sooyun then asks why Mincheol got married. A flashback reveals a bit of her past. Currently, Mincheol is 33 years old and works as a manager at a mid-sized IT company. But when she was just 9 years old, she imagined her ideal man as someone tall, handsome, attentive, and mature, and it would be great if he were also intelligent. At 16, she said any decent guy would do, someone a little taller than her, smart enough, and on the same wavelength. Her standards kept lowering, and by 22, she didn't care much about details and just wanted someone reliable. At 33, she didn't even know what to say anymore. By then, she just didn't want to remain single, and that's how she ended up single since birth for 33 years, no longer knowing what defines a good man. One day, her colleagues noticed she was in a bad mood and heard that she had a bad date with a divorced man who was a father of 2. So Sooyun tried to smile at work, but her sadness showed on her face. She stayed late at work, wondering if it's really that hard to find a good man to date, because she feels she's not asking for much, just someone who can understand her and be on the same wavelength. After thinking about this, Mincheol, who was her subordinate, appeared with a drink, and asked her to check his work. After that, she couldn't get him out of her mind. Because of this, she confessed her feelings for Mincheol to Choy. He was a junior at the company and joked that he wanted a slice of wedding cake and even offered to help with the preparations, saying it would cost about 200 million won for the celebrations. So Sooyun had already imagined getting married around May, and wanted to have 2 kids soon. However, now all of that has gone down the drain, and she says there's not much to do about it, and besides, Mincheol isn't the only man in the world. Choy agrees and says there are plenty of others, but the manager is crying her eyes out. After work, Jin Mincheol gets ready to leave, and the two of them follow him. So Seon asks Choy if they really have to do this, but Choy insists that it's necessary to be sure in situations like this. He asks if So Seon had to bet, what would she consider more likely, Jin Mincheol's marriage or the end of the world tomorrow? She responds, the end of the world, and Choy agrees, saying they need to check whether Jin Mincheol is really married or not. So Seon seems a bit hesitant to follow Mincheol like that, but as soon as Choy mentions seeing his colleague near a woman, she changes her mind. The girl wonders what kind of woman Mincheol likes. Outside the house, Han Jia puts out her cigarette, saying that Jin Mincheol has finally arrived. Seeing her from a distance, So Seon is shocked. Despite being apprehensive, Jin Mincheol says he's home. The protagonist stared at him seriously, but Mincheol has no idea what he did wrong. Then, he makes the worst mistake a married man can make and asks if something is wrong. Han Jia becomes extremely irritated with this question, and Mincheol's colleagues watch the argument from afar. So Seon realizes she really is Mincheol's wife, and he probably likes women with strong personalities. But Choy tells her to calm down and keep listening. Soon, they hear Han Jia scolding Mincheol for coming home so late. Mincheol says he came straight home after training and asks if that's late. Han Jia responds that 8:20 p.m. isn't very late, but he should have called to let her know he'd be late, so she would know whether to eat before or not. Mincheol asks if she was waiting to eat with him, saying she didn't want to eat with him in the morning and assumed she'd want to eat alone. The protagonist corners him and says these are different discussions and that it's common courtesy to inform someone if you have something to do before coming home. While the gossipers speculate, Mincheol asks if he can really call Han Jia. He says he avoided calling as much as possible, thinking it would make her uncomfortable. Han Jia asks when she ever said he couldn't call. Mincheol replies that it was in the 5th grade, but Jia says if it was back then, it's probably because they didn't have phones yet. He explains that around that time, he called to ask if she wanted to play at his house but was completely ignored. The protagonist tries to brush it off, saying she doesn't remember any of that. Mincheol politely says it's fine if she doesn't remember, but she says, in any case, what she's trying to say is, before she can finish, she notices someone listening to their conversation, seeing a person hiding behind the wall. Mincheol asks what's wrong, and she replies that she thought she saw someone spying on them, though maybe it was just her imagination. Either way, Mincheol understands that he can call her for personal reasons. The protagonist says she never opposed that but feels like she's being tricked. Still, she asks what he'd like to have for dinner. Behind the wall, Choy thinks they were nearly caught, and concludes that regarding Mincheol's wife, he has the impression he's seen her somewhere before. Later at home, dinner, like breakfast, was a chicken shake, and Han Jia thinks the zoo monkeys eat better than this. She also remembers the 5th grade incident and how Mincheol remembers it, considering it happened about 20 years ago. Rivers and mountains have changed since then. She also thinks it was around that time that she stopped playing with him. As children, they were very close, even sharing food when they were together. Since they lived in the same neighborhood and were the same age, they went to the same kindergarten and grew up in dual-income families. Thinking back, they were very close, and Han Jia can't remember why they drifted apart. At that age, she was teased for always being around him, but when a friend asked if she was dating Mincheol, she started avoiding him. Mincheol would call her house to invite her to play, but she started ignoring him. After that, they went to the same elementary school. However, as soon as Mincheol tried to talk to her friend, she ignored him and only talked to other girls, leaving Mincheol completely excluded. Remembering this makes Han Jia feel very uncomfortable. Now that she realizes this, she feels very embarrassed about how she acted and wonders why she did that. Besides, they hadn't contacted each other until now. Even though they're married, the protagonist concludes that it's strange not to have spoken to him before. But when she checks her phone, she notices that they only resumed contact specifically to discuss the marriage, and concludes that they really hadn't spoken during all that time. She can't believe it, and thinks they genuinely never had personal conversations. Now, she feels bad for getting angry earlier and thinks she was heartless. Soon, she concludes that she should apologize. Mincheol, on the other hand, has his phone in his hand, undecided about whether or not he should send a message. He even bangs his head on the table, but after returning, decides to take action, and sends the message to Han Jia. She receives Mincheol's message. After reading its contents, she feels moved by what he wrote. After that, she bursts into his room. Mincheol gets startled and reminds her that they agreed not to enter each other's rooms like that. So she knocks on the door before entering, and recalls that, in Clause 5 of the contract, they agreed to prioritize discussions when there's a complaint. Han Jia says she has something to complain about, and wants to discuss it immediately. She asks if there's any problem with that. Meanwhile, she wonders how Mincheol found out that she likes chicken feet since that was the content of the message. Later, the two sit down for dinner, and Han Jia holds a bottle of beer on her shoulder, commenting on how cold it is, even though it was delivered. saying that's pretty cool. However, Jean Minchio draws her attention and reminds her that she mentioned wanting to discuss something, a complaint. All innocent, Jean Minchio asks if he made another mistake. Jia responds that it's not that, and says he was just being impolite. Jean Minchio doesn't quite understand. She says she's referring to the beer, claiming that it's impossible to eat chicken feet without beer. Minchio asks if her complaint is about chicken feet again. The protagonist says there's something else too, and stopping to think, mentions that they've never had a deep conversation. She then says they should talk while having a snack. Jean Minchio points out there's no specific rule about chicken feet being a snack, but she disagrees, saying that, in her country, they're the same thing, and she pours beer for both of them. However, she notices that Minchio doesn't want to drink, and he, without any remorse, confirms that he doesn't. In Korea, it's customary to serve others when drinking together and only serve yourself if you're alone. Because of this, she feels embarrassed, and asks why Jean Minchio doesn't want to drink. He responds by showing his arms, saying it could cause muscle loss. The protagonist then tells him to forget it, claiming she must be crazy for wanting to chat while drinking with a fitness rat who only eats chicken and grass 3 times a day. She changes the subject, and says they promise not to force each other, so he doesn't need to drink with her, and can go back to his room. However, his next gesture surprises her, as he grabs a healthy meal and a bottle of water to eat with her, saying they need to do something like this from time to time. Even though he can't drink the same thing as her, they can still toast. After that, he asks what she wanted to talk about. But Han Jia has already forgotten what the topic was. She called him to drink without thinking. But now that they have time for a serious conversation, she has nothing to say. For now, she just wants to toast to their health, her with beer and him with water. Han Jia drinks desperately, unable to remember what she wanted to discuss, and thinks everything will be fine once they've had their drinks. However, that's not usually how it works, and 2 hours later, she's really talking, but a bit too much. She brings up a topic from when they were younger, when Minchio was very cold toward her, but Jean Minchio doesn't remember. The protagonist insists he's pretending and asks what happened, that he suddenly distanced himself to do something and ended up trembling with anger. Jean Minchio says that, back then, he went easy on her and feels super embarrassed. However, Han Jia is so drunk that she doesn't notice and simply says it was great back then, because she used to go to his house after school, and they played a lot, even arguing, saying everything was fun during that time. Things were really different, even the color of her hair. But in the middle of the conversation, Jean Minchio notices that Jia has fallen asleep. He pokes her to be sure, and realizes she's really out. Suddenly, a loud noise startles her. Minchio set his phone alarm and tells her that if she sleeps there, she'll catch a cold, and if she's tired she should go to her room while he cleans everything up. She's really sleepy and apologizes, saying she hasn't drunk in a while and usually isn't this weak with alcohol. Then she realizes she drank all the soju beer, even though she brought it for them to share. Then, she asks Jean Minchio for an ear. This unusual request leaves him confused, but Jia ends up grabbing his glasses and putting them on her face, saying his vision is really bad and affirming she's known that since the old days when all he did was play games every day. Jean Minchio becomes more serious and asks her to stop playing around and return his glasses, but she insists she won't, saying if he wants them, he'll have to take them by force. Jean Minchio says she's drunk. However, Han Jia denies it, and claims he's afraid of looking even sillier without the glasses, which is why he doesn't want to take them from her. She then remarks that she's always wanted to say he looks terrible without those glasses, because he looks like an old man wearing thick glasses like that. Jean Minchio pins her against the wall, and Jia starts laughing, saying he's trying to kidnap someone. She adds that if he thinks she'll return the glasses just because he pushed her against the wall, he's got the wrong idea. But suddenly, she catches a glimpse of Jean Minchio looking at her without the glasses. This makes him look even more handsome. Han Jia becomes flustered, and Jean Minchio asks her to return his glasses. With the food still on the table, Jean Minchio, now on the couch, leans over her against the wall, demanding his glasses back. Han Jia feels incredibly embarrassed. Before he can press further, she puts the glasses back on his face, and runs to her room. The protagonist slams the door shut in a panic, and even feels short of breath. Her heart is pounding out of her chest, and she wonders what just happened. Jean Minchio's face without the glasses is burned into her mind, and she's confused about how she felt in that moment. The next morning, Jean Minchio prepares to go to work, and only the errata says goodbye to him as he leaves. But then he hears something behind him. Han Jia slowly opens her bedroom door, and as she looks at him now, she concludes that he's just the same old Jean Minchio. She tries to approach him slowly, but Jean Minchio hears her and asks what's going on, saying she's been acting weird since yesterday. The protagonist tries to talk to him, bringing up what happened the night before, but her embarrassment is so overwhelming that she can't speak. She wonders why she's stammering so much since she just needs to apologize and take the blame. But as soon as she starts to speak, the errata appears in front of her, making her extremely flustered, and causing her to choke on her apology, as she got distracted by the cat. Still, she insists she needs to move past this, telling herself that nothing major happened, and no matter how drunk she was, that prank went too far. It's not like she's ever done anything wrong before anyway. She concludes she should only apologize if she really did something wrong, so she decides to act naturally as usual. However, when she tries to do so, she becomes completely clumsy, and Jin Mincheol doesn't understand anything. Even his cat seems to feel secondhand embarrassment, and after that, the protagonist doesn't know where to hide her face. Later, Jin Mincheol arrives at work, and while talking to his coworker, Choy tells him that, if he were to summarize what he just heard, he thinks Jin Mincheol's wife personified a cat. Jin Mincheol confirms. Choy doesn't know if his colleague is being serious or trying to brag, but Jin Mincheol insists that's not it, and says he asked Choy because he has more experience with love. His coworker asks if Jin Mincheol has spoken about this to anyone else, especially manager So Seon. Jin Mincheol says no and asks if that would be a problem. Choy says that's all he needed to know and insists his colleague should only talk about this with him. Anyway, returning to the topic of the wife, he asks if she wasn't just being playful or joking around. Jin Mincheol replies that they aren't that close yet. However, Choy points out that they're married and says he doesn't understand that, but claims Jin Mincheol came to the right person, as he considers himself a professor of romantic studies. He explains that the more complex the problem, the simpler the solution, like checking and formatting a computer when it has an issue. Confirming that's how it works for now, Jin Mincheol ends up more confused than before. After work, he goes home. When he arrives, Han Jia greets him. She seems unusually cheerful for her standards, and Jin Mincheol doesn't know how to react. But he remembers his coworker saying that when talking to women, the most important thing is sympathy, and the second most important thing is also sympathy. He knows that Choy said whenever he's uncertain about something, he should just nod or follow what she does. So, he decides to take the most unexpected action of all, and imitates a cat in the same way Jia did in the morning. Han Jia tries to keep a serious posture, but she feels like she's dying inside, as if she were in a war, imagining what her funeral would look like. Here lies Han Jia, 32 years old, unemployed, and dead from excessive embarrassment. She falls to the floor, and Jin Mincheol finds it strange, and says he heard his boss say that following what she did would make her happy. The protagonist gets up, irritated that Jin Mincheol told someone she doesn't even know, and asks why he mentioned it to others. He replies that he didn't know what else to do, and that's how the cat incident between Jin Mincheol and Han Jia ended, with the addition of another clause, and was left as a dark past that will never be forgotten. The new rule states that what happens between them must remain a secret. Jin Mincheol feels uncertain about something, and asks what she meant by what she did earlier. However, seeing how embarrassed she is, he decides to change the subject and asks her to forget it. A few days after their chaotic newlywed life began, at work, So Seon has a good idea. She thinks about it for a while, and becomes determined to execute it, deciding to throw a welcome party. Jin Mincheol tells the protagonist about the party, and she feels a bit shocked, and also has some questions about it, asking why such a party is happening so suddenly. Jin Mincheol explains that after a meeting, everyone congratulated him on his marriage, and the idea came up. That's why he's letting her know in advance. Moreover, the people at his company never force him to do anything. Even after-work dinners are voluntary. With that, he tells Jia not to worry and feel free to share her thoughts, as it was just a casual topic that came up at work. However, the protagonist says they're going. Jin Mincheol insists he was serious when he mentioned they weren't forced into it, but Jia says she didn't hate the idea and wants to do it. He asks why she wants to do it, and the protagonist asks why not. Welcome parties are held after someone moves into a new home and gets married. It's customary to invite family and friends to participate. In simple terms, it's a tradition to invite and greet them so they treat you well in the future. It's not mandatory, but it's a canonical event in Korean life. Although the guests might enjoy it, from the host's perspective, there's a lot to prepare. It's an event that some avoid as much as possible. So, the protagonist accepted because, at the moment, she hates Jin Mincheol. The next day, Jin Mincheol says it's not too late to cancel and asks if she's really going to do it. But she just tells him to go to work, and thinks that Jin Mincheol is really cheeky for mocking her about the last mistake she made. She looks at his worried face and thinks it serves him right. Meanwhile, Jin Mincheol tells her to think it through, but the protagonist is having such malicious thoughts that she doesn't even consider not accepting. She says that if Jin Mincheol doesn't want to, he can just tell his colleagues he doesn't want to have the party. However, Jin Mincheol considers that rude. So, Han Jia tells him not to worry and to go to work. Before leaving, she notices something different about him. For the first time, Jean Mincheol smiles before leaving the house, and then says goodbye. The protagonist wonders what's wrong with him since he seemed happy. She thinks Jean Mincheol is being forced to do something he doesn't want, and should feel bad about it. So, she decides to create an observation diary about Jean Mincheol's behavior. The first characteristic of Jean Mincheol is that he's crazy about efficiency. He seems like an eco-friendly robot with a battery. The second characteristic is that he's surprisingly weak to requests, and if pressured, he ends up giving in. He obviously didn't want to have a welcome party, but he also didn't refuse, and at the same time, tried to escape by using her as an excuse. Thinking it over, she concludes that she is, indeed, Jean Mincheol's wife, and she considers how he addresses her when talking to others. There's nothing wrong with him being formal, but it's kind of embarrassing. Jia is also worried about his earlier smile, and wonders if she's forgetting something. But she gets tired just thinking about it, and concludes it's better to prepare for the welcome party. Exactly 2 hours later, she starts regretting this decision. The protagonist didn't know how to prepare some dishes and called her mother for tips, but the whole process was painful for her. She didn't even know how to use the pressure cooker, begging her mother for help. Sometime later, the party begins. Even though she's exhausted, she greets the guests. Jean Mincheol notices and asks if she's okay. She simply says that Jean Mincheol better start treating her well from now on, which makes him respond that he didn't even want the party. Han Jia keeps up her role as a good hostess and invites everyone in. She has prepared a huge dinner table. All the guests are surprised by it. The protagonist says it's no big deal and tells everyone to eat freely. With so much food, they thank her. Choy finds everything incredible and asks if Jean Mincheol eats like this every day. Honestly, he says it's the first time. However, Jia cuts him off, telling him not to say that. The night goes on, and the party gets lively. Some guys are already drunk, including Jean Mincheol, who his colleagues hadn't seen drinking before. But to endure the situation, he made an exception. Choy asks So Suyeon if she's satisfied now. He says that Mincheol and his wife invited them to the welcome party, and she saw it with her own eyes, so she should be content. He asks if she didn't notice things like how they don't seem like a typical couple or don't even wear their wedding rings, hinting she might have those doubts. However, So Suyeon elbows him for encouraging her to doubt her colleague, saying all those doubts came from him. Choy then claims he understands and says he'll continue with what he prepared, asking her to stop hitting him. He gets ready for his act. Standing in front of everyone, he introduces himself as Choy Sang-woo, the company's darling and mascot. His colleagues immediately realize he's prepared something again. He says the atmosphere has peaked, and he's thinking of taking the chance to get to know Mincheol better since he's been acting a bit strange lately. Choy asks if he can continue, and Han Jia says yes. With that, he explains that earlier, he asked everyone to write anything they were curious about regarding their colleague. He mentions that there are a lot of questions and warns that Mincheol and his wife might face some unusual requests or inquiries, asking if they're okay with that. Jia agrees to proceed. Choy says anything could come up and first announces a question from So Suyeon. But as he reads the request, he looks at the girl, who, embarrassed, tries to play it cool. Super excited, Han Jia asks what the first request is. Choy silently reads that the colleague asked for the couple to kiss in front of everyone. Knowing this would cause embarrassment, Choy skips the request and moves to the next one, leaving So Suyeon disheartened. Mincheol nudges Jia's hand, and she realizes he wants to say something. She asks what he wants. Jean Mincheol asks if she's okay, but Jia doesn't understand. He says the atmosphere is strange and thinks they're going to ask some personal questions, but she says they shouldn't hold anything back from the others. However, she notes that they're only married on paper, so she says it would be nice to act like a happy couple in front of the others. What she means is that they should answer moderately and flexibly so they won't be bothered by it in the future. Jean Mincheol understands her strategy and takes into account the temporary rule of flexibility. Choy then announces the next question from Kim Jinya from HR, saying it's a very personal question. He asks about the marriage proposal, how and where it happened, in detail. If they don't answer, they'll have to drink a glass of beer. As he begins a countdown, the protagonist reflects on what really happened and concludes it's better to skip this and drink. However, Jean Mincheol takes the lead and starts answering, saying he was eating chicken breast in the smoking area, and she suddenly proposed to him. The protagonist is shocked because she wasn't expecting that. Choy asks if what Jean Mincheol just said is true. A flashback of their marriage plays out at that moment. Jia remembers that Mincheol really was eating chicken in the smoking area, and she brought up the topic of marriage first. Shortly after, they got married. She concludes she doesn't want the others to know about this, and he chose not to answer, accepting the punishment instead, and drank the glass of beer. Choy comments that they seem very much in love, and the protagonist tells Mincheol that they need to talk about this later. The manager then says that now that everyone is more relaxed, he will move on to the next question, which is a bit intense. He asks when and where they had their first kiss and whether they'll answer or take the punishment. Jia tries to recall if they've ever actually kissed and concludes it must have been at the wedding, but she remembers they didn't kiss because she was determined not to do so. It would also be strange to claim their first kiss was at the wedding, so she ponders the best way to respond. But she concludes that she should just pass on this one again. With the delay in her response, Choy begins the countdown. The protagonist is about to drink when Mincheol answers that their first kiss was when they were just 5 years old, in kindergarten. Jia definitely wasn't expecting that and is startled, because she doesn't even remember it herself, and Mincheol's colleagues realize they were childhood friends. Mincheol even mentions that she had a nickname during preschool, and says she was called Kissy Ghost, because she went around kissing people. However, she's furious at this revelation, especially because Mincheol chose to bring it up now. For his coworkers, the night turned out to be very entertaining. A while later they thank the couple for the party and say their goodbyes. The protagonist stops Mincheol from leaving with them, and drags him back home. As So Soo-yeon prepares to leave, she overhears the couple talking about answering questions flexibly, and Jia says Mincheol was a little too flexible. So Soo-yeon realizes that the two are indeed close and feels awkward, and with that she gets a ride home. On the way back, Choi San-ho notices something is bothering her, and says she's right about something, mentioning that before the questions began, he was also confused, and based on their actions and answers, he's unsure whether they're pretending or not. In a way, they're different from other couples, and Choi doesn't think it's just suspicion at play here. He asks if he should investigate further, but So Soo-yeon tells him to drop it. He says he understands but is already planning something else. So Soo-yeon insists that he should forget about it, and Choi almost crashes the car again, startled. He then says So Soo-yeon is giving up too easily, and asks why she's suddenly denying it, and keeps saying she needed to see them for herself. However, as soon as So Soo-yeon saw them, she immediately knew her suspicions were unfounded, and felt disheartened by it, wondering where someone like her could fit in. In any case, she states that it ends now since she confirmed it for herself, and tells Choi that he's worked hard during this time. Unlike his colleague, Choi San-ho isn't ready to give up, and suddenly swerves the car, leaving her frightened. She asks what he's doing, and Choi responds that he suddenly feels like drinking. He says she has time as well and that everyone was drinking earlier, but he didn't get to have a single sip. Choi says she doesn't have to drink with him but insists she at least keep him company. She gets excited and asks if he'll pay. Choi says yes and asks if she wants to eat something as well. So Soo-yeon says she just had Korean steak from Two Blues not long ago. The manager asks if she's crossing a line with this establishment, but she replies that he asked for her preference, and asks if it's okay for them to go there. Choi says that since she put it that way, he has nothing more to say. He agrees to take her to the restaurant. So Soo-yeon gets excited and says she'll also order yakho. However, Choi already thinks she's pushing his generosity, and so, the small celebration that Mincheol and Jia were unaware of ended quietly. However, the next morning, Choi San-ho wakes up to find So Soo-yeon lying next to him. For them, this might mark a new beginning. After the twists and turns of the welcome party, on Saturday at 11 in the morning, Mincheol and Jia held a reflection meeting about the previous day. The protagonist asks if he now understands what he did wrong. Mincheol admits that bringing up their first kiss like that was embarrassing, as was the marriage proposal. Jia agrees, but he asks why, and she responds that it obviously makes no sense. She adds that if a perceptive person were there, they might have doubts about whether they're a real couple. However, she quickly concludes that she needs to calm down. After all, she's talking to Jean Mincheol. She remembers how he once tried to buy 7 identical outfits to avoid any inconvenience. That defines him as a crazy guy who eats protein bars and sweet potatoes just for the sake of convenience. Meanwhile, Mincheol tells the errata that her dad is being scolded right now and asks her to play somewhere else. The protagonist thinks she can have a normal conversation with him. In any case, she forbids him from telling people about their first kiss, and says they need to make up another story. Mincheol asks why, and Jia reminds him of the reactions from last night. Besides, it's not normal for a couple to have had their first kiss at 5 years old. He asks what he should say instead, pointing out that it's really strange if a married couple hasn't had their first kiss yet. Jia recalls how, on their wedding day, she promised to kill him if their lips ever touched. Mincheol says they only pretended, which is why he thought it better to claim their first time was when they were 5. The protagonist had never thought about this before and didn't imagine she'd have to worry about it at some point, but she knows that dating comes before kissing. And during their school days, they could have dated and kissed, but she concludes that saying they've been together since then would make it seem like they've been a couple for too long. She spends a lot of time thinking about it, until her phone rings, and she sees it's her mom. Her parents call her via video chat, which immediately raises questions. Her mom sees the two of them together, and says it makes her very happy. Jia asks her mom why they're video calling and if something happened. Her mom asks her to guess where they are, and Jia replies, "At the movies?" asking if her parents are bragging about being on a date. However, her mom says the main reason for the call is that today is the premiere of a movie called Spaghetti Man and asks if her daughter remembers it. Spaghetti Man is considered the beginning of popular superhero movies in the Protagonist universe. While on the call, her mom says she went to see the movie with her dad as soon as the theater opened. She then starts telling the movie's story, but Jia ends the call. Right after, she tells Minchio that they're going out and he needs to get ready immediately. In the Protagonist family, there's a tradition. If someone hasn't seen a certain work, like a movie, the one who saw it first will spoil it as a joke for the others. Han Jia has done this many times to her family, and has also been spoiled by her younger sister. So she knows that if she doesn't watch a movie right after its release, she'll hear all about it from her relatives. That's how the two of them end up at the theater. Jia doesn't sit in the center seat but says it's good enough. However, she looks at Minchio and sees he has a very serious expression, asking if he doesn't like Spaghetti Man or hates going to the movies. If that's the case, she says he should have warned her earlier. Minchio responds that he actually likes this movie series and was looking forward to watching it, but this whole situation with her feels like a date in a way. He adds that during the video call, she asked if her parents were on a date, and now he imagines they're doing the same thing. Realizing this, Han Jia lets out a yell, but someone shushes her, saying the movie is about to start. While watching the movie she had been so eager to see, she can only think about the topic Minchio brought up. In a way, she manages to enjoy the movie, but she can't stop thinking about the idea of a date. Suddenly, she decides to eat some popcorn, and out of nowhere, a classic dating scene happens. Their hands touch over the popcorn. At that moment, Han Jia realizes it, as does Minchio, and both become embarrassed. A while later, the movie ends. Han Jia even tears up with emotion, saying the movie was incredible and shouldn't have ended that way, believing it's the best she's ever seen. So much so that she can't put her feelings into words. She admits there were some lackluster elements, but by her standards, it was truly the best. On the other hand, she tries to gauge Minchio's reaction, thinking that the hallmark of a date is watching a movie with someone while paying attention to their response. But Jin Minchio is a 32-year-old otaku who has been a fan of the Spaghetti Man for over 20 years. He even tears up with emotion while watching the movie. The second characteristic of a date is feeling good when the other person enjoys the movie, something Jia is doing right now. On their way out, she chats with him about the movie, saying that's why she invited him to watch it, and asks if he's as happy as she is. Jia keeps recalling some parts of the movie, realizing she was in a rush to avoid spoilers, and now she feels the need to talk to someone about it but doesn't know how to explain, because, in fact, she's been on a date. Minchio, however, is only thinking about how much he wants to see the sequel. The protagonist reflects that this is her first time going out with Minchio, but someone bumps into her on the escalator while she's lost in thought, and this causes her to lose her balance, about to fall in the next moment. But Minchio quickly notices this, and with his fast reflexes he tries to catch her. However, things don't go as expected, and the position they end up in surprises everyone around them. Jia lands face first onto Minchio, giving the impression she jumped on him to kiss him. Their lips actually touch, and as soon as she realizes it, she becomes extremely embarrassed by the situation. The escalator they used is near the ticket booth. As a result, several people witness the scene. To the others, the couple kissing in such an unconventional way becomes an unexpected attraction. But to the protagonist, it's utterly mortifying. She remembers that first kiss so vividly even now. Her first kiss with Minchio, which happened accidentally, had a faint taste of caramel. A child passing by with their mother points out the scene, but the mother insists the child shouldn't watch such an embarrassing moment. Embarrassment is a small word for what the protagonist is feeling now. Minchio picks her up and pulls her away, holding Han Jia in the air. She asks him to put her down, and Minchio complies. They stare at each other for a moment, but Han Jia runs off, overwhelmed by the embarrassment. Out of nowhere, she turns to Minchio, and says she cancels what just happened. She asks if Minchio is familiar with the 3-second rule, claiming it was popular during her school days. The rule states that anything that happens within 3 seconds can be cancelled. Even food dropped on the floor can still be picked up and eaten if it's within 3 seconds. But since she can't handle awkward situations, she ends up running again, and stops in a smoking area. As she thinks about what happened, she says she ruined everything, because what she said earlier makes no sense. If something happens within 3 seconds and gets cancelled, it doesn't mean it didn't happen. She throws away her cigarette, and wonders what she's going to do now, because she doesn't know how she'll face Minchio. However, she doesn't realize that he has already approached and found her in the smoking area. Minchio then tells her that if she's done smoking, she should get rid of the smell immediately. But in her thoughts, she says this is all happening way too fast. Then she asks if Minchio is okay with it, about the fact that their lips touched earlier. Minchio, however, brings up the 3-second rule, and says that since she cancelled it, he's pretending it didn't happen. Afterward, He asks what they're going to eat. Jia replies that she'll go along with whatever he wants. They then head to a fast food place. Jia chooses a sandwich and a soda. As she prepares to eat, she wonders why Mincheol seems so calm about it. Meanwhile, he eats as if nothing happened. The protagonist realizes that when she told him to pretend it didn't happen, Mincheol simply took that to heart and is acting normal. Then she comments that it's amazing how he's eating chicken breast even after going all the way there. After eating, they walk back home. But unlike Jean Mincheol, the protagonist can't stop thinking about what happened. She remains pensive for a while, and concludes that she's being overly dramatic today, because two people accidentally bumping lips is nothing more than that. And there's also the fact that they're married, and this is the first time they've watched a movie together. So she thought Mincheol would be acting differently, but somehow, his calm demeanor bothers her, because to her, it feels a little disappointing. However, Mincheol strikes up a conversation and says he has something to say, and starts talking about their lips touching, stating that it lasted more than 3 seconds. He's unsure of the exact duration, but he's certain it was more than 3 seconds. What he's trying to say is that they can make that their first kiss. Mincheol recalls their earlier conversation about when and where their first kiss happened, and suggests they could use this story and setting, just saying it happened before. However, that's how Jia, at 32 years old, ended up running away a month after getting married, and the reason for her escape was that she couldn't stand seeing Mincheol. In any case, that's what happened, and she ended up seeking refuge at her younger sister's house, saying she'll stay under her care for a while. The protagonist arrives unannounced at her sister's house, and greets her and her family. Her sister and brother-in-law are clearly awkward, but Jia had nowhere else to go. In her mind, she pauses the scene, and, as if in a conference, she talks with younger versions of herself from different times in her life. First, she explains the reason for this meeting, and asks them all to look at the screen. She then shows them the incident that happened 5 hours ago. The current Jia states that it was a mistake and asks if everyone agrees. The reactions are varied. Jia says she's still surprised, and shows them the part that stands out the most. When Mincheol suggested they make it their first kiss, she's outraged by this, saying that he spoke about it so casually in that situation and even acted quite coldly. Then, she asks if the others agree, but it seems like she's alone in her outrage. The youngest version asks if kissing isn't a good thing. The current Jia says they need to move on. The protagonist declares that she wants to stay away from Mincheol but doesn't want to return to her hometown. So, she decided to stay at her sister's house for a while to avoid her husband. 15-year-old Jia has a question and asks if her 32-year-old self doesn't have any friends, because otherwise she wouldn't stay at her sister's house. She suggests that if Jia looks around, she might find someone willing to help. But the older Jia isn't sure she can relate to her 15-year-old self right now, as so much has happened since then. Her 25-year-old version agrees with that, but she points out that the most important thing is that her sister and brother-in-law owe her a lot. She reveals that, in reality, she was responsible for bringing the two together as a couple, and plans to use that to her advantage. In the past, she set up a blind date for them when she hadn't quit her job yet, gave her sister an allowance, and pressured her to marry quickly. According to the protagonist, considering how indebted they are to her, they can't possibly ignore her now. When she arrives at their house, she gives a gift to her brother-in-law, and then greets her sister. Jimin welcomes her warmly, saying it's kind of her to show up on the weekend with gifts. But then, she asks why Jia showed up unannounced, and if she's learned anything about manners. Jia responds that she learned manners the same way her sister did, while their father plays with the children. The protagonist comments on how energetic they are but notes how calm her brother-in-law is. She then asks whom the kids take after. Her sister says the kids take after her, and looking back to when the two of them were children, she's sure their future nieces and nephews will be just as lively. To tease her, Jimin calls her the eldest daughter of their mother. Jia doesn't like this. However, Jimin says that whatever the reason for her visit, she has something to say first. Jia becomes apprehensive about the topic, but her sister starts talking about the Spaghetti Man movie and wants to share spoilers. However, the protagonist says she's already seen it. Her sister is frustrated, asking how Jia managed to watch it so quickly. Jia responds that she made use of the weekend, and it has nothing to do with being unemployed. After that, Jimin asks if something happened with her sister's husband. Jia even spits out the juice she's drinking and tries to play it off to avoid answering the question. But her sister knows her too well and says Jia has a bad habit of hiding whenever something bad happens. Jimin quickly deduces that Jia is upset with her husband and left home. With nowhere else to go, she came there because it's comfortable for her. Jimin asks why Jia came to her house. The protagonist hesitates, and says she just wanted to see her and her nieces and nephews. Nothing more. Her sister is happy that Jia is showing she cares about her family, but the protagonist knows it's a lie and is touched that her sister got emotional. With that, Jimin says this is the perfect moment to leave the kids with their aunt and enjoy some alone time with her husband. Young asks if this will really work, and Jimin replies that her sister agreed, so she wants to make the most of this time together. In her mind, Han-jia concludes that her sister is cunning, clearly aware of her situation and taking advantage of the opportunity. Soon, she realizes she has no choice. Sinners must accept their punishment. Even so, Jimin says her sister can relax in exchange for watching her kids. 2 hours were enough for the kids to drain all of Jia's energy and even draw on her house, making her realize the greatness of her parents. The kids want to play, but Jia insists they just watch a cartoon. However, they want to make their aunt a horse and keep playing, even asking her to imitate the sound of the animal. But just when she least expects it, the doorbell rings, and she thinks she's been saved by the bell. She assumes it might be a delivery person or something and goes to answer the door. However, since it's the weekend, the usual practice would be for them to leave the package at the door and leave. So, when she opens the door, she's startled, because Jin Mincheol appears with a gift, trying to please her. Immediately, Han Jia slams the door in his face. Because she wasn't expecting him, Jin Mincheol tries to talk to her, and the protagonist can only think about what he's doing there. The protagonist is super confused to see Jin Mincheol. She doesn't understand how he found her and even considers the possibility that he put a tracking device on her. Her niece asks who the man outside is. Jia says he's some kind of weird person, like a boogeyman. However, her niece shows her a photo of Mincheol on her phone, and says her mom told her to open the door if he showed up. She also said he's her uncle and would bring delicious food. A while later, she gives ice cream to her younger brother, and Jin Mincheol finally manages to enter the house. The protagonist looks at him awkwardly, and a tense atmosphere hangs between them. Han Jia decides to talk to Jin Mincheol, and asks how he figured out she was there. Mincheol replies that he got a call from her sister-in-law, who told him to take her back home as soon as possible. Jia gets angry at her sister, but quickly remembers that her sister did the same thing when their parents fought. Even so, she feels betrayed. She then asks if Mincheol is stupid and if his reasoning is really that slow. She also asks why he showed up as soon as they called and says she's avoiding him because she feels uncomfortable. But Mincheol uses Clause 5 of the contract against her, reminding her they're supposed to prioritize talking if there's something to complain about. He asks why she's angry and wants to know when and where it started. This makes the protagonist conclude that Mincheol wants to argue with her. However, Mincheol persists with his question, wanting to know why she's upset. By this point, even she doesn't know. The protagonist only remembers that after the accidental kiss, her heart stirred for no reason because of the moment. And when she was trying to act as if it never happened, Mincheol came at the perfect time. Her heart was racing, and Mincheol elegantly jumbled his words. Thinking about it, she wonders why her heart pounded so much because of Mincheol. Since he's insensitive, ignorant, and frustrating, there shouldn't be room for her to feel flustered by someone like him. Jia considers Mincheol annoying, and the fact that she was expecting something from him irritates her even more. But before she could explode, her niece calls her, and puts a spoonful of ice cream in her mouth, asking if she likes the flavor. The child says her mom taught her that sweets are the best cure for anger. She also offers the ice cream to Mincheol, but he declines because of his strict diet. In a way, Han Jia feels embarrassed because she can't act her age around the kids. She feeds her little nephew the ice cream, and while doing so, she realizes the incident wasn't something worth getting so angry about. Jia is already calming down and even enjoys playing with her nephew, and reasons like an adult, saying a kiss isn't something to stress so much about, and both of them should act their age. Seeing Mincheol interacting with her nieces and nephews, she wonders if the two of them are still just kids. Her first post-marriage escape, which she carried out in such haste, ended in just half a day, all thanks to her sister's elegant consideration. At the end of the day, they say their goodbyes, and head back home together. The protagonist thinks that if she had known it would end like this, she would have stayed in her room, concluding that she left unnecessarily, and only made things worse. On the way back home, Mincheol apologizes, saying he should have done it earlier, and came to this conclusion after remembering the marriage contract. He admits he was insensitive about what happened at the cinema, by suggesting that setting as their first kiss scenario. The protagonist is surprised by his gesture, but asks if he thinks that's why she was upset. She says it was one of the reasons, and adds that the reason he's apologizing now is because he thought she was angry. Han Jia points out that when they were kids, every time something happened, he would apologize, and it seems he hasn't changed that habit. However, in a way, he really did do something wrong and deserves to be punished. Just like when they were kids, she wants to flick his forehead, and says she'll start with just one. Mincheol says her flicks hurt too much, and Jia asks if he'd prefer a punch instead. Naturally, he changes his mind instantly. Before following through, she says she'll explain why she was upset first. The protagonist tells him that at the cinema, they talked a lot about how their first kiss should be and accidentally ended up kissing in an unexpected way. That's why she doesn't want their first kiss to be remembered as an accident. She then states she'll fix that. She holds Minchio's face and moves closer to him slowly, kissing his forehead. Afterwards, she tells Minchio to remember this well from now on, because this was their true first kiss. On another day, Minchio talks to Choy Sanhwa and essentially tells him that the story he shared about his first kiss with his wife was wrong. He mentions that the actual first kiss happened in front of his sister-in-law's house. Minchio also explains that he misspoke earlier, which has now made his wife angry. Choy understands that since everyone at the company knows the old story, not the real one, Minchio is confused about how to clear things up. But Choy scolds him, pointing out that he's worried about something so trivial. He adds that after the party, he was so tired he could barely talk, and now Minchio is caught up in such a minor issue. Minchio asks if something happened after the party, but Choy simply says he had a good meal and went home. Choy seems flustered and quickly says nothing much happened. Suddenly, someone shows up and speaks to him. Choy realizes it's So Suyeon, who, upon seeing him, blushes in embarrassment. Choy tries to act casual but ends up looking awkward himself. So Suyeon, realizing the situation, leaves the area as if nothing happened. And Jean Minchio is the only one who doesn't understand anything. He asks Choy if he did something wrong to make So Suyeon leave like that, but Choy tells him to just stay quiet for a moment. Choy Sanhwa recalls the time he joined the company, and also his introduction to the team. Back then, he loved knowing that his colleagues referred to him as the smooth talker of the company. What no one imagined was that most of the things he said about himself were lies, or at least, he thought others believed them. In truth, Choy is an introverted guy who enjoys relaxing at home. He's the youngest in his family, and grew up with 3 older sisters. Listening to his sisters argue all the time and talk about their female-related issues made him more attentive to women. This allowed him, from an early age, to advise his friends about women, giving tips and even encouraging confessions. Over time, misunderstandings piled up, and before he knew it, he had become something like this. Despite his current age, he has never actually been in a proper relationship, and has no personal dating experience. So, waking up one fine day, to find a woman lying next to him in bed, left him extremely confused and embarrassed. It really made him think about all sorts of things, like doubts about what to do next. For someone as perplexed as he was, manager So Suyeon softly apologized for what had happened. From that point on, Choy Sanhwa found himself completely bewildered. The first time he met the manager was actually at university, not at the company, when he was just a 20-year-old freshman. So Suyeon had a different personality back then. She was the head of the department, and already a senior about to graduate. One fine day, So Suyeon saw him doing nothing, and made him carry some soju boxes with the others. Her imposing presence made him feel a fear he couldn't even understand, and he only realized now, years later, that they are just 4 years apart. Currently, So Suyeon is 33 years old, and Choy recalls what happened after Minchio's party when the two of them went out to eat. Choy spent most of the time quiet, while So Suyeon interacted with him and stirred things up. As she talked about the food, Choy thought that she was no longer just intimidating but also an adult, and that's how they decided to just forget what happened that day, like adults normally would. But when they arrived at work the next day, the awkwardness between them was so palpable that they couldn't even manage to greet each other, and simply pretended not to know one another. As they went about their work routines, Choy remembers the moment when So Suyeon apologized, wondering what her words meant at that time. Even though he doesn't know the answer, Choy knows he'll never forget what happened that day, because he feels he hasn't matured enough yet. And just like he thought back then, the same applies to So Suyeon. Seeing her in the morning, he was certain of it. So Suyeon doesn't seem comfortable with the situation either, and the fact that neither of them can talk about it only makes things worse. Choy Sanhwa seems to realize this, and tries to take the initiative, confronting manager So Suyeon, but he freezes as soon as he looks at her. The two of them use the same elevator, and inside, Choy starts a conversation, but he doesn't expect to freeze midway, making the situation even worse. So Suyeon takes the initiative to smooth things over and talks as if she's just chatting with a coworker. The manager notices this and goes along with it, but it doesn't please him, because he's too bothered to simply forget what happened. He tries to say what he wants again, but a coworker enters the elevator, cutting him off. In a way, he feels a bit relieved. The same goes for So Suyeon, and the coworker, who has nothing to do with the situation, gets stuck in the middle, absorbing all the awkwardness. Later, Choy watches the time pass, while working in his office, and thinks how nice it would be if an earthquake happened right now, so he wouldn't have to deal with these things, calling it the best day of his life. Choy really has no idea what to do. This is too much for someone who's always giving others relationship advice. After what happened in the elevator, he thinks it would have been better if he had just said nothing and pretended everything was fine, because that way, he wouldn't feel so exhausted and self-conscious. Seeing his strange behavior, Jean Minchio shows up and asks if he's okay. Choy responds that it's nothing, but in his thoughts, he wonders why, all of a sudden, Jean Mincheol, who's usually clueless, seems so perceptive. And surprisingly, he's taking care of him, even offering a cereal bar. This reminds Choy that Jean Mincheol is a married man, which theoretically makes him better at relationships than Choy himself. So, Choy Sanhua decides to ask his colleague a question. He says there are probably times when Mincheol has arguments with his wife and they both feel awkward, and asks what he does to fix it. Jean Mincheol thinks this is the worst question for him to answer, and remembers Han Jia telling him to keep everything about them a secret. But he also recalls the extra clause added during the welcome party, allowing some degree of flexibility to keep their relationship lighter. So, he decides his response will be flexible enough, saying he recently had a fight with his wife, and to ease the tension, she kissed him first. But this doesn't help his colleague at all. Choy then wishes the couple a long life together, hoping they live to be 100 years old. After work, he walks and thinks that if this were someone else's problem, he could easily solve it. But it's a completely different story when it's his own problem. Choy thinks that this kind of thing would be his sister's specialty, but he's hesitant to ask her for relationship advice. His desperation is so overwhelming that he swallows his pride and makes the call. In her house, you can see a bookshelf filled with books, and some trophies, showing that his sister is well educated. When she answers the call, she's surprised it's her younger brother. Choy Yanju, 32 years old, is the second eldest sister, and she asks what occasion prompted her brother to call, as it's a rare event. She's a romance novelist and an internet celebrity, which is why her brother asks for romantic advice for a friend. After hearing the story, Yanju understands that her brother's friend is close to a woman, but they ended up rushing things, leading to conflict in their relationship. He confirms this and says he wants the two to go back to being friends as they were and asks for her help, promising to buy her something she likes in return. Yanju is an expert in this field, but she wants to clarify one thing first, and asks if this friend is actually him. Knowing his lie didn't work, Choy Sanhua hangs up the phone. Yanju knows that, no matter what, her brother is still a child. After hanging up, Choy Sanhua becomes annoyed, because, as always, his sister manages to be unnecessarily perceptive, leaving him at a loss for words. At that moment, he just wants to talk to someone comfortably, without being judged. When, suddenly, Han Jia appears in front of him, coming out of a store. It wasn't what Choy had in mind, but he concludes it might be a good idea. So, he tries to start a conversation with her, even though they haven't known each other for long. And he thinks that whether he pretends to know her or not, it's still going to be awkward. In any case, he tries to talk, mentioning that the store sells interesting things, and Han Jia agrees. However, she's also uncomfortable with the situation and quickly says goodbye. Seeing her leave in such a hurry, Choy Sanhua finds it strange, but Jia seems familiar to him, as if he's experienced something like this before. Then, he has a flashback in his mind of a girl he met a long time ago, who was very similar to Han Jia, but Choy Sanhua knew her by a nickname. So he asks Jia if she is Chicken Hotfoot. The protagonist's reaction gives everything away. She tries to deny it, and pretends not to know what he's talking about. But Choy Sanhua introduces himself as Yanju's younger brother, and says they met once or twice in their hometown. Han Jia knows what he's talking about but feels too embarrassed to admit it. Choy Sanhua realizes she's pretending not to know him, and recalls how she and his sister used to brag in front of him all the time. Jia says he's imagining things because she's not the type to do that, and if he's interested in chicken feet, he can go to a market. However, Choy Sanhua mentions the author of a debut novel, It's Hot Because It's Summer, and her next work, titled Why Can't I Become a Secretary? The name was blurred, but romance readers would have heard of it before. The pseudonym, Chicken Hotfoot. Choy is even certain she once gave him an autograph. In the protagonist's past, there were moments when she wanted to work in a department, or get a job instead of chasing her dreams. But she also wanted to get into a prestigious school. Somehow, she made it to college but didn't live up to her potential, as she was tired of unnecessary gossip about others' relationships, which made her college days frustrating. At 22, she had nothing better to do, so she read romance novels, but found them all boring. There was a time when Jia would lie in her room every day and read every romance novel she could find. She also had a friend who believed in her no matter what, Choy Yanju, who was also 22. The protagonist met her in a liberal arts class. She was the quiet and shy type of friend they met once or twice a week. If she had to mention one unique trait about her, it would be that Yanju loved reading. More than that, she also loved writing, and the protagonist was always reading her drafts, which embarrassed her friend every time. But the reason was that Han Jia loved what she wrote, and always encouraged her to keep working on her stories. Once, her friend wrote a romance novel for a contest, and Jia liked it so much that she encouraged her to share it with more people. Eventually, Jia herself found writing fun, and asked her friend if she should try it too. Even though she was clearly quite shy, Choi Yanja said it only depended on her friend. However, what the protagonist didn't expect was that, just 3 months later, she would be called a writer, and her friend would debut right after her. Thinking about it, Han Jia concludes it was too much. What started as a joke turned into something serious. She also thinks they should have contacted her before the awards ceremony and asked if she really wanted to use that pseudonym, Chicken Feet Lucky Charm. The protagonist wishes she had thought better and chosen a wiser name, but she had unnecessarily eaten chicken feet on the day she registered for the contest. With her secrets suddenly revealed, she agreed to talk to Choi Sanhwa. He asks if she's been doing well, addressing her by her pseudonym, but the protagonist insists she has a name and would like to be called by it. Anyway, Choi says he didn't expect her to marry his colleague and asks how that happened. However, Han Jia says she doesn't know either. Choi Sanhwa asks how that's possible, but she insists they change the subject. He already shared the matter that was bothering him. Choi Sanhwa insists it's not about him, and Jia agrees to talk about the friend he has with the same name. The protagonist acknowledges he's bothered but asks if he doesn't find it wrong. Choi Sanhwa simply replies that he doesn't want to fight, only consult her. Soon, Han Jia says she has a problem too and recalls a saying that a person can endure the same problem up to 3 times if they're patient. She then says she's already endured 3 times and is still angry, asking how she can vent. Choi Sanhwa asks if it's really anger, and Jia doesn't like his response. She then returns to Choi Sanhwa's problem with the awkward situation he has with a woman. He insists it's not about him, but the protagonist has a doubt, and asks if he needs someone to talk to about it or someone to push him to move forward. This response leaves Choi Sanhwa deep in thought, but he quickly tries to steer away from the subject. Han Jia says that if the person has no interest, then he doesn't need to think so deeply about it. After discussing this matter, Choi Sanhwa walks back to his home, and thinks his sister and Han Jia have something in common. Both are writers without empathy, but regardless, he knows what he wants to do now. Shortly after, he makes a call, and So Suyun, who is ready to sleep, sees his name on her phone screen. This shocks her because she wasn't expecting something like that. Even so, she answers, and Choi asks for a moment of her time. She says she can talk and asks if something happened, but Choi just says he wanted to hear her voice. So Suyun is confused and asks if he's drunk. Choi Sanhwa replies that he would like to go out for a drink but that it's not polite to pretend to be drunk to say what's on his mind. He also says it's a shame to only hear her voice, because he'd like to see her in person. Standing in front of her house, Choi Sanhwa asks if they can meet. So Suyun feels extremely uncomfortable and says it's too late to go out, and asks if they can meet tomorrow since it would be difficult for him to come to her house. But Choi states that he's already at her door. He also says he won't take long, at most 20 minutes, because what he has to say shouldn't be discussed over the phone. However, So Suyun doesn't even consider it, as she's already in her pajamas and without makeup. Besides, she's in a chaotic and uncontrollable state, having knocked over some things in her surprise at his call. Nevertheless, she gathers courage because she's curious. So Suyun shifts her posture, and tries to prepare for the occasion. Soon, she asks Choi to wait about 10 minutes, and he says he can wait as long as she wants, as long as she comes out. Choi Sanhwa spends some time waiting outside, tapping his foot as he waits, and suddenly remembers a line from a novel he read, that said, "If you come at 4 in the morning, I'll be happy since 3. When he was younger, he always wondered what that meant, and now he has a better idea. As So Suyun finally arrives, fully dressed up, and asks if he waited long, Choi thinks that when the moment comes, his heart might explode, so he tries to stay focused. That, he realizes, was the meaning of the line. Then he says they need to go somewhere and sit down before they talk. Sometime later, they go to a place. However, upon arriving there, Choi feels embarrassed. So Suyun feels no different, and asks if, instead of a playground, they shouldn't go to a cafe. However, Choi says that this is a more appropriate place for them to be alone, and he doesn't want to take up too much of her time. Still, after finishing each sentence, he freezes out of embarrassment. In his mind, he knows he must take the initiative, and he stands up, positioning himself behind So Suyun's swing, asking if what happened that day is really something they should pretend didn't happen. So Suyun definitely didn't expect this, and asks what they should do instead if they don't pretend it didn't happen. Choi replies that he can't just do nothing, crossing his arms and waiting for her response. However, So Suyun says he's an expert on the matter, and even gives love advice, but Choi says he realized the difference between knowing and experiencing. Then, he kneels in front of her, and says that if she truly wants him to forget that day, then she should at least teach him how to do it, claiming he doesn't know how to do it on his own. So Suyun blushes at this near confession. She thinks for a moment before speaking, but she says she doesn't know how either. Soon, Choi Sanhwa is quite surprised because she was acting as if she didn't know. So Suyun states that she doesn't know how to forget things and just pretends to forget them, admitting that deep down in her heart, She also hopes that day won't be forgotten by either her or him. The scene cuts to Mincheol's house. As soon as Han Jia arrives, she starts eating, and Jean Mincheol stands still for a moment, then says that she's gained weight. The protagonist nearly chokes upon hearing this, and asks who Mincheol is talking to. Jean Mincheol is confused by the question, and says it's obvious he's talking to the rat, since she's heavier now, asking if it's because of the colder weather recently. Jia relaxes and says that animals living in colder regions gain a lot of weight, and concludes the rat must just be preparing for winter. Mincheol asks if he should turn up the heater, but Jia can only think about how he almost called her fat. The next morning, Jean Mincheol gets ready to go to work. He notices Han Jia is there and asks what she wants, but she says it's nothing, and just tells him to be careful on his way. Mincheol thinks about what response would be most appropriate, and he calls her by her name, gesturing with his open hand. He says he'll be back, just like the Terminator. Somewhat embarrassed, Jia just tells him to stay in the shade. In her thoughts, she wonders what's wrong with him. Jean Mincheol thinks he nailed that line, and Jia can only think he must have figured out she's been giving more treats to the rat lately. The cat has an automatic feeder that dispenses 30 grams of food a day, but she really has gained weight because Jia has been giving her more treats than usual. As she feels bored, she thinks that no matter how healthy the rat seems, her food amount is still very small, and she even cries, begging for more. Han Jia learned to get the cat's paw, and the cat learned to get along with her. The two communicate well, and the protagonist finds her very clever. As a reward, she offers treats and says she enjoys this type of relationship. However, she doesn't understand why the rat has gained weight, because in addition to exercising, the two play when Jia is bored. She picks up the rat, and asks how much more weight she can gain, and based on the weight, concludes that she has indeed gotten heavier. Jia checks her phone and remembers she's been using the food delivery app a lot. She looks at the scale, something she really doesn't care about, but it hasn't moved. She wonders if she's also gained weight, but looks at the scale as a cruel object. However, she still has doubts, and considers weighing herself to clear them. The scale lights up as she steps on it, and Han Jia is happy, saying people don't gain weight that easily. However, she had stepped on it while holding the cat. The protagonist says Jean Mincheol has been so worried lately, he hasn't noticed his scale is broken. Then, she looks at the rat, who doesn't understand a word of what she's saying. Next, the protagonist goes to her clothes, and decides to try on some pieces, saying it doesn't make any sense for someone to gain weight without noticing. She then feels more relaxed, because her clothes are no longer tight. And, as expected, the scale was indeed acting strangely, but when she bends down to pick another outfit, she hears the sound of something ripping. As soon as Jean Mincheol arrives home, he finds Jia drinking something healthy, and doesn't understand her sudden change in behavior. Han Jia asks him to teach her how to work out, arguing that he's good at it, and should know how to teach her. Jean Mincheol gets super excited about this, and holding her hand says this is a spot-on decision. He also says that, at their age, exercising is a necessity for survival and asks when she wants to start. The protagonist can only think about why Mincheol held her hand. Meanwhile, he keeps asking about enrolling her in a gym. Jia thinks it's not the time to feel flustered just because they held hands, because, when it comes to Jean Mincheol, there are two things she didn't consider. The first is that he's a maniac who eats chicken breast even during holidays. And the second thing about him is that it's impossible for an office worker to go to the gym every day, unless they're crazy about exercise. While Han Jia is lying exhausted on the floor, Jean Mincheol keeps talking about working on her lower body. At another moment, a meteor cuts through the sky, and the protagonist tells Jean Mincheol that an asteroid, which was far from Earth, is actually going to hit it. With that, she asks what they should do, since this is humanity's last night, and Han Jia wonders what humans would do to make their last night meaningful. Mincheol, however, asks why she's talking about something so obvious, and says he knows exactly what to do. Right after, the protagonist screams, and wakes up, realizing it was all just a dream. She feels confused and thinks this is the worst kind of dream anyone could have. Immediately, she feels a pain in her stomach, and starts writhing in bed. Han Jia concludes that everything that has happened so far is just karma finally catching up to her, ever since she consulted a nearby specialist. Before starting to work out, Mincheol said she made the right decision to exercise. After starting, Mincheol says people don't die that easily. Then, he wants to do another set. Jia says he claimed that was the last one, but Mincheol insists it wasn't. Soon, he motivates her to keep going, even though she doesn't want to. After coming home from the workout, the protagonist concludes that Mincheol is crazy and wonders how he can eat such tasteless food every day. Not only that, but he also sent a message about the soreness she felt in the morning, saying it's better to go out for a walk than stay idle. Jia states she doesn't know when, but this has already gone wrong. However, she thinks she should have already seen results before working out, as she barely ate the day before and must have lost at least 3 kilos. But obviously this is the mindset of someone who has never exercised before. And to her surprise, the numbers were the same, which left her extremely frustrated. Back at the gym, Mincheol says he'll try a very effective workout, and explains it's an exercise that will make her completely healthy in just 3 minutes. However, he notices she won't fall for it, but he starts anyway, telling her to correct her posture and put strength in her feet. Compared to what she's done so far, this is nothing. That's what the protagonist thought before starting, and she realizes why this exercise is counted in seconds, as she thinks there can't be a single person who does this for minutes. She also notices that Mincheol trains intensely, and that not just anyone can keep up with him. At times, he alternates between 100 and 150 kilos. However, after he finishes a set of deadlifts, a woman approaches and asks if he works at the gym. Mincheol replies that he doesn't, he's just training. The woman says he's so polite and professional while working out that she thought he was a personal trainer. Then, she says it's her first time at the gym, and if Mincheol doesn't mind, she'd like him to show her how to use the equipment. In his innocence, Mincheol agrees. Watching all this from afar, Hanjia loses her mind. The girl points to a machine and asks what it is. Mincheol explains that it's a back machine, and says the basic principles of using exercise equipment are all the same. Steady position, focus on posture, and don't strain the joints. She also says that, with this equipment, she focuses on her back muscles rather than her shoulders, and it's better to hold it slightly above the clavicle for up to 3 seconds. She comments that it's very kind of him, and Jia simply observes the two. Then, the woman says she saw something online about squats being good for the body and asks how to do them. Jia realizes that the woman is openly flirting with Mincheol. On top of that, she thinks Mincheol came there to train with her but stopped what he was doing to help a stranger. Han Jia insists to herself that she's not angry. Meanwhile, Mincheol explains squats to the woman and teaches her everything he knows, even giving her some tips on how to master the basics. However, in the middle of the explanation, she says she fell and coincidentally ends up in a cute pose. Jia, now fully annoyed, laughs at the situation. The woman says it's truly her first time and asks for help getting up. Mincheol immediately offers assistance, saying everyone is like this their first time, while Jia watches everything. As she gets up, the woman says Mincheol is amazing and flawless, and 100% her type. From the way he speaks to the way he acts, even his appearance, she is smitten with him, and asks if Mincheol has time afterward, inviting him for a coffee. Han Jia doesn't like this situation, and tries to get Mincheol's attention, but she reminds herself she has no right to stop him. After all, their marriage is only real on paper. She recalls how they promised not to interfere in each other's business, and to respect each other's private lives. With that, she thinks it would be better to just leave and act as if she knows nothing. But before she can do so, she hears Mincheol decline the invitation. He is determined not to accept, and apologizes, stating that he's a married man. Moreover, he knows Han Jia is nearby, and heads in her direction. Mincheol places a hand on her shoulder, and tells the stranger that this is his wife. This action leaves Jia extremely surprised. Not only her but also everyone else in the gym. Some even find it amusing to see Mincheol holding his wife, as the protagonist's expression shows her discomfort. The woman who was flirting with Mincheol is also shocked, as she never expected this to happen. She's surprised to learn that Mincheol is married. He asserts that he is happily married and introduces Jia as his wife. Mincheol also says that there's no room for anyone else in his marriage, and he's content with everything. Hearing this, the woman at the gym feels embarrassed, and says he should have mentioned he was married. However, Mincheol points out that she didn't ask. She admits that's true and apologizes to both of them, then leaves, finding the entire situation too awkward. Shortly afterward, Mincheol asks Jia if they should leave too, and she agrees. However, the gym elevator is out of order, so they end up taking the stairs. The protagonist's face is burning with embarrassment, and she feels like she might die from the awkwardness of it all. Han Jia also notices that Mincheol referred to her as his wife in front of everyone. This reminds her of a previous conflict, where she often wondered how Mincheol would refer to her in public. Now that she's been called his wife, she feels even more flustered about everything. Her embarrassment is so overwhelming that she crouches on the stairs, wishing she could hide like an ostrich. Mincheol asks if she's okay and offers to carry her on his back if she's tired. Han Jia insists she's fine. Meanwhile, she wonders if Mincheol is popular with women, and looking at him closely, she thinks his appearance is quite good. She then asks if things like this happen often. Mincheol is confused. Jia clarifies her question, referring to women hitting on him at the gym. Mincheol responds that it happens sometimes, and after working out, they invite him to a cafe or a bar. But he wonders why they bother working out if they're going to such places afterwards, since he himself avoids those foods, preferring protein shakes. The protagonist thinks that if the women approached him with protein shakes instead, Mincheol would probably fall for their tactics. Moreover, he mentions that he doesn't see those women at the gym afterward. Han Jia thinks her situation is already bad enough, having to go train, and now these incidents are beginning to bother her as well. She wonders how people who didn't even intend to keep working out managed to endure. Watching Mincheol use the stairs to strengthen his legs makes him seem crazy to her, and she thinks she's the crazy one who's going to die training with him, but in a way feels relieved, because Mincheol is the kind of person who doesn't pay attention to others. However, her relief fades, and her legs start trembling. The protagonist barely has time to feel relieved before realizing she'll have to do it all over again the next day, and she thinks she's really going to die if she keeps up this routine. She knows it's shameless to think this way since she asked for it, and even though she appreciates Mincheol's time after work, she needs to stay alive first. She plans to buy something to thank him later, like a gift. Suddenly, Jia notices that Mincheol is smiling a lot and wonders why, as it's the first time she's seen him like this. She quickly asks if something good happened to make him smile like that, and he responds yes. Jia asks what it is, and Mincheol says he's happy to train with her, because having someone to train with has made him happier than he thought he'd be. He also says that training and sweating together gives him a very good feeling. At that moment, Han Jia finds herself in the awkward position of wanting to say she can't work out, but being unexpectedly weak in this kind of situation. And that's how she, even unwillingly, ended up spending extra time training with Mincheol every day, even feeling embarrassed by what he said. Some time passes, and a new day dawns. The protagonist can't even get up properly because she's so exhausted from the previous day, and she regrets agreeing to train with Mincheol, thinking she's really going to die at this rate. In any case, she remembers that Mincheol said it would be better to go for a walk to relieve muscle soreness. But upon thinking about it, the idea of walking in the morning to ease pain from too much exercise doesn't make sense to her. However, gathering her courage, she decides to do as Mincheol suggested and realizes it actually works. When she went out for a walk, she was just trying to trick her body, but she's surprised that it worked and thinks the human body is truly strange. At this rate, her weight goal will be reached soon. While walking, she passed by a hooded man, who ended up recognizing the protagonist. Hearing her name being called, she gets startled. Then, she stops walking, and looks at the man, feeling a bit apprehensive since she doesn't know what to expect. The man removes the hood of his jacket, and says he thought he was mistaken, but upon seeing her, he recognizes her as Han Jia, and after smiling, he says it's been a while since he last saw her, like she's on a racetrack. The protagonist bolts into a relentless sprint. The mysterious man insists she stop, saying he's tired and can't run anymore. Han Jia tells him he can stop chasing her and rest. However, he keeps following her despite her telling him to stop. After running for a while, Jia gets tired and pauses. The mysterious man does the same. Both have little stamina due to smoking. Han Jia thinks in moments like this that she should exercise more. But when she sees the man, she notices he's holding an asthma inhaler. He says Jia is putting in a lot of effort, and encourages her to exercise and live well. Laughing at the situation, she apologizes, but the man says she should stay nearby because of his condition. After resting a bit, he hands her a business card and introduces himself as Na Young Duk. He brags that his card also functions as a ruler, but the protagonist says it's not correctly measured. But he explains that he deliberately put the wrong scale. The protagonist asks why he did that. Na Young Duk, a former producer, says that it's also part of marketing. Na Young Duk explains that it immediately sparks curiosity, and the question initiates a brief conversation. He says Jia must think he's an idiot, and claims that's intentional, meaning he achieved his marketing goal. Immediately, Han Jia wants to throw the card away, but he insists that since they're in a park, it's inappropriate to litter, so she doesn't. Then, Na Young Duk asks what she's been up to lately. He also asks if she's still writing. With that, she realizes he's suddenly steering the conversation to his intended topic and wonders if she should start a battle of insults. However, Na Young Duk says that when a writer and a producer meet, it's a regular greeting, and asks her not to get angry. And regarding what happened back then, he apologizes and says he's truly sorry. Han Jia tries to remember what happened, but Na Young Duk's phone alarm goes off, and he realizes that the meeting he thought was scheduled for the next day is actually today, leaving him in a panic. Before leaving, he says it was nice to see her again, and that he hopes for another chance to meet her, asking Jia to call him so they can arrange something. However, this desire is not mutual. After he leaves, she puts on her cap, and thinks about what he said, looking at the card he left behind. Jia crumples it immediately, but doesn't throw it away because of the trash disposal rules, thinking to herself that she's not crazy enough to call him. At night, in Jean Mincheol's house, a candlelit dinner is set on the table. Jean Mincheol, wearing his usual clothes, is utterly confused, seeing Han Jia in front of him, excited about the food, and eating with great joy. Not knowing what to make of it, Jean Mincheol feels uneasy and tries to talk to her. He says he really doesn't care what she eats or doesn't eat, but asks if she should be eating like this, all dressed up, with a napkin, fancy cutlery, and a protein shake in a wine glass. Jia responds that she's just trying to feel good, regardless of what she eats, as long as it's what she usually eats. Minchyo finds this very strange, but she couldn't care less. The protagonist explains that it's just vegetables she eats daily and grilled chicken breast, and she only did this to feel better. She asks if Jean Minchyo isn't happy about it, but he insists it's not the food that's bothering him. Jean Minchyo notices something different about her behavior. The protagonist was trying to act eccentric to lift her mood, but instead, she only managed to annoy Jean Minchyo, who sat across from her. Back in her room, she wonders what's wrong with her, since she's not the type to get down over things like this, and she ended up making Minchyo uncomfortable. She also remembers her old friend's sister and the producer from earlier, wondering why she keeps getting involved with such irritating people from her past. She quickly thinks fried chicken and soju would be perfect for this situation, but she tries to stop thinking about it because she needs to control her weight, and has been doing well so far. She knows that moments like these are when she grows stronger and affirms to herself that she can control her urges. However, in the middle of her internal battle, she hears someone knocking on her door, and Jean Minchyo asks if she can come out for a moment. Han Jia asks why, but he only insists, so she goes out despite being tired. She steps out and asks what's going on, but when she sees Jean Minchyo, she's surprised. Minchyo extends his hand to her, properly inviting her out, and all dressed up asks her for a dance. The protagonist definitely wasn't expecting this. She feels extremely flustered, and tries to retreat to her room, but Jean Minchyo holds the door and asks her to wait. Han Jia ends up stepping out of the room, despite her embarrassment, and Jean Minchyo also freezes up. They both sit on the couch, keeping their distance from each other. She concludes that Minchyo must have thought her strange behavior earlier was because she was upset. Jean Minchyo says he didn't call it strange. Jia realizes he's just trying to make her feel better but asks why he chose a dance. Jean Minchyo explains that it's what they do in movies. The protagonist can only think that he's childish for suggesting a dance to lighten the mood, but she admits it's somewhat romantic. Still, since she never takes anything seriously, she asks what kind of movies he's been watching. Minchyo responds that he watches Bollywood films, and thinking about it, they're always dancing, whether the mood is tense or even in the middle of a battle. Even though she knows he's right, Han Jia can't believe he actually said that, and she's not surprised that the music he played earlier was oddly upbeat. However, Jean Minchyo adds that when they were younger, Jia used to say something. When you do it alone, it's weird, but when you do it with someone, it's fun. With that, he says that if Jia is going to act strangely anyway, it's better to do it with someone else. However, her reaction isn't what Jean Minchyo expected, as Han Jia starts laughing at the situation. Jean Minchyo asks why she's laughing, and she asks why she shouldn't be. She says Jean Minchyo is right. If you're going to act weird, it's better to do it with someone, and she remembers she really used to say that. But she says she's thought of something better than dancing, and asks if he's up for it. Sometime later they leave the house, and Han Jia is thrilled to be about to eat something she loves. Jean Minchyo then realizes the fun thing she mentioned was pork belly and soju. The protagonist asks if he isn't having fun because she certainly is. Minchyo tries to say something, but she asks him not to ruin the moment, and says today is her day to enjoy, and he's not allowed to argue while they're having fun. But Jean Minchyo says he doesn't want to argue, he just wants to suggest a better place. He mentions that she was doing something earlier when she lit the fire and cut the meat. Han Jia says the true flavor comes from the charcoal, but Jean Minchyo tries to finish his thought. However, she interrupts him because she's having too much fun with the food. By the way, she says going to a fancy restaurant dressed like this would be a really boring thing to do. Now, grilling pork belly in luxurious clothes is much more fun and mysterious. Jean Minchyo isn't sure about it being fun, but he agrees it's certainly mysterious. The protagonist says what she finds most amusing about it is feeding him a lettuce wrap. Jean Minchyo asks why she's doing that out of nowhere. She responds that she wanted exactly that reaction. She also says days like this make her want to do things she normally wouldn't, and that she just wants him to go along with her. She hands him the food with a mischievous look on her face. As soon as Jean Minchyo eats it, he realizes it's very spicy and asks why she did that, and Han Jia just laughs at his reaction. After that, they go to karaoke, and the protagonist sings her heart out, even hitting a high note. She tries to convince Minchyo to sing afterward, but he refuses. Then, they walk to another place. As they step onto a specific spot, Han Jia remembers playing with Jean Minchyo as kids, pretending the floor was lava, and thinks others might find it strange, but she didn't realize how wonderful it was to have someone accompany her in moments like these. Next, she puts on a horn tiara, but she's the kind of person who feels embarrassed afterward. The protagonist finds Minchyo even more embarrassing because she sees him holding a butterfly toy from his childhood, but she remembers she was the one who gave him that toy. Jean Mincheol says playing like children is definitely fun. However, Han Jia asks him to stay quiet for a while, thinking that, as embarrassed as she is, she should just say what she needs to. Then, she gets Mincheol's attention. Han Jia thanks him for staying with her during this time. Jean Mincheol gets worried by her saying this out of the blue, and she notices his reaction. He asks if Jia isn't hurt because, according to him, when people do and say things they normally wouldn't, it's a sign they're about to die. However, she says she just wants to express her feelings as she feels them and that if he doesn't want to hear it, he can cover his ears. Then, she thanks him again, saying he's been very thoughtful, and that as soon as she can, she'll repay him for what happened today. Han Jia says that's all for now and that he's not allowed to ask anything further because she's too embarrassed to answer. Jean Mincheol tries to speak, but she pretends not to hear him. Then Mincheol grabs her arm and pulls her close to him, asking why she always interrupts him, and says he has something to say as well. Super embarrassed, she asks what it is. Jean Mincheol takes a while to respond, increasing the tension even more. He holds her by the chin. At that moment, Han Jia thinks there's no way he'll go through with it. The protagonist recalls that when she was about 10 years old, she was watching a very popular show with her family. When a kissing scene came on, she felt super embarrassed at the moment, and even covered her younger sister's eyes. At that age, she thought kissing was embarrassing. Then, she called her mother, asking why they were kissing, insisting it was forbidden to kiss in public. But her mother responded that it wasn't and that you could do it whenever you wanted. Her husband even kissed her on the cheek, making Jia even more flustered. According to what her mother said, a kiss makes someone feel like the other person's lips belong to them. It's not a feeling that appears out of nowhere. She didn't understand this when she was younger, but now that feeling is about to surface. Jean Mincheol moves closer to her, while holding her face. Han Jia prepares herself by closing her eyes, and stays like that for a moment. Her nervousness only grows, to the point where her hands are trembling. But Jean Mincheol simply removes a loose thread from her clothing, saying that the way it was stuck had bothered him all day, and that he would have died of frustration if he hadn't taken it out. Now he feels much better, unlike Han Jia, who is about to explode with anger. But she decides to take action, and catches him off guard for a moment, pulling him by the tie, and kissing him right after. Since Jean Mincheol didn't do it, she decided she would, taking him by surprise. His horn headband even falls off, along with his hat, hitting the floor afterward. However, the moment was so intense that he didn't even care, and focused on the kiss. Meanwhile, Han Jia opens her eyes for a brief moment, and sees a few people around them watching. She quickly pulls away from Jean Mincheol, and both are left extremely embarrassed. Jia herself doesn't know why she did that. She simply gave in to her instincts. Then Mincheol asks her why, and she responds that it was a service. Jean Mincheol doesn't understand the answer, and asks what she means by that. But she is honest, and says she did it just because she wanted to. She adds that a service always depends on the person offering it. After that, she heads to the bathroom, and in a way, feels relieved. After washing her hands at the sink, and drying them with a paper towel, she continues to insist on the service concept, convincing herself that she shouldn't care who the recipient is. But soon after, she snaps back to reality, and wonders what she's talking about, telling herself that this service idea doesn't make any sense. On the other side, Jean Mincheol had fled to the bathroom because he was nervous, but he knows he can't stay there forever. Han Jia tries to understand why she kissed Mincheol, thinking it must have been because she was dazed by him almost kissing her. Even now, Jia can't believe she did that. She recalls telling Choy that if there isn't at least some mutual interest, there's no need to overthink things. But now that the situation involves her, things are different. In her mind, she revisits a few memories. Their walk on the beach and the moment she first saw Jean Mincheol without his glasses. These memories make her heart race, and she's starting to understand why. She remembers the time Jean Mincheol cornered her against the wall, the moments before she fell on him on the escalator, the time she decided to train with him and ended up touching his hand, and even when he called her his wife at the gym in front of everyone. All of this reinforces her feelings for him. The protagonist feels torn about whether to give in to these feelings or not, but she tries to brush it off, convincing herself it was nothing. Jean Mincheol, on the other hand, seems to be trying to do the same. After the kiss between her and Jean Mincheol, the protagonist imagines herself as a film director in her mind, calling for the scene to be cut. The director asks what's wrong with them and advises them to do the kiss scene without treating it like a joke, also mentioning that it's Jia's first on-screen kiss, and that it's too short. She suggests prolonging it to make it more romantic. Using some figurines, she demonstrates how it should be done. Han Jia insists that she did it right, just as the director instructed. She asks if she should show the scene again, and then she kisses Jean Mincheol once more. However, the protagonist wakes up, realizing it was just another dream, one that, incidentally, is becoming increasingly vivid. Upon remembering the actual event, she feels embarrassed. knowing that, beyond the dream, there was also a real kiss. This fact leaves her stressed, because, in addition to marrying Jean Mincheol, she also kissed him, and this could stir feelings within her. But when she sees Jean Mincheol coming out of the shower, she becomes flustered. Mincheol puts on his glasses and says he was startled by her sudden appearance. She greets him half-heartedly, and Jean Mincheol asks what's wrong with her tone, saying she doesn't seem okay and asking if something is bothering her. Han Jia replies that she just had a nightmare, while inwardly questioning whether she actually likes him, but concludes that there's no clear answer to that. Still, she recalls seeing a simple quiz somewhere that suggested focusing on someone as they eat, and if you like the way they eat, then the answer is yes. The protagonist isn't sure if that's accurate, but when she looks at Mincheol, he's drinking his food. Han Jia wonders how she's supposed to evaluate that, and if it even qualifies as eating. However, she concludes that she can't judge him based on that alone. She thinks she can base it on the last time they ate together, recalling the previous day and the spicy food. But quickly, the scene of the kiss takes over her mind, and she hits her head on the table. Jean Mincheol asks if she's okay. Jia responds that there was a fly on the table, and he asks why she decided to kill it with her forehead. The protagonist can only think about the previous day and concludes that everything happened just because she was drunk, but then corrects herself, knowing that's not true. Soon, she thinks it might have happened because of the atmosphere, and imagines it could only have been the suspension bridge effect, where someone feels attracted to their partner in a moment of anxiety. Because every day with Jean Mincheol is a long stretch of anxiety, thanks to the contract marriage. She avoids being reprimanded, but is always afraid of being caught, and her body ends up reacting. With that, she thinks what happened was due to a momentary emotion caused by a misunderstanding. She remembers the dream she had, and again hits her head on the table. Jean Mincheol becomes concerned seeing her do this a second time. He ends up getting closer to her, to ask if she's okay. Seeing him this close startles her so much that she almost falls off her chair and asks why he got so close. Jean Mincheol says she wasn't responding, so he thought something was wrong, but Jia insists that nothing is wrong with her. Mincheol says this is real life, and, as he tries to say something to her, he ends up mentioning the previous day. However, just bringing it up embarrasses her greatly. So, Han Jia quickly stands up and changes the subject, saying he's already fed and can go to work. She says she'll wash the dishes, so he can just leave them on the table. After that, she simply wishes him a good day at work and locks herself in her room. Jean Mincheol didn't expect her reaction, but realizes now isn't the best time to talk about it. Soon after, he heads to work. As soon as he arrives, Choy Sanhua notices something different about him, and says his colleague must have had a busy morning. Mincheol doesn't understand, so Choy points out his mismatched socks. Then, Mincheol goes to prepare coffee, but while separating the ingredients from the packaging, he gets confused and, instead of throwing the packaging away, he throws away the coffee and ends up holding the packaging. Soon, he feels a bit disoriented, and without realizing how distracted he is today, ends up drinking plain hot water and burns himself. As he touches his mouth, he remembers the feeling of the kiss they shared, and Han Jia's face right in front of him. After that, he recalls that she said kisses are up to the person who offers them. But this entire situation leaves him feeling unsettled as well. He removes his glasses to think more clearly, and spends a moment reflecting on it, wondering what he should do now. Later they meet again, at the gym. However, the usual atmosphere hasn't returned yet. Since Mincheol couldn't think of anything better, he decided to bring her to train, saying she's already done the hardest part. Now it's time to build some muscle. So, he wishes Jia good luck, and she returns the gesture with a smile, wishing him good luck too. The protagonist is still thinking about what happened 20 hours ago, insisting it was a mere accident. She tells herself the kiss might have seemed intentional since she had a goal and a reason, but it's far too embarrassing. She's at the gym struggling with this, to the point of having strange dreams, while Mincheol shows no reaction. Even though she knows he's always been like this, she thought he might act differently after that. Mincheol approaches to whisper something in her ear, but she gets startled by him, saying he appeared out of nowhere. Mincheol tells her she wasn't responding, and asks if she's finished warming up. She replies that she has. Then, Mincheol asks if she's ready to start that, but Jia has no idea what that means. He explains he's talking about the bench press, and reminds her they discussed it on the way there, but the protagonist was too distracted, lost in thought. Then, she remembers seeing the equipment before on YouTube. Han Jia asks if it's safe because she saw a video saying someone could end up stranded and injured. It also mentioned that beginners could hurt themselves doing it. Because of this, she's scared. Mincheol asks what she's been watching, but she asks if the video was fake and none of that could really happen. Mincheol, however, responds that it could actually happen. However, he is sure that nothing will go wrong, as long as she has a professional like him by her side, probably. That last word made her uneasy, but it didn't stop her from being placed on the equipment. Lying down, She thinks this situation is quite frightening, and the metal bar in front of her is intimidating. Jia says that if she dies, she will write his name in her will, but Mincheol asks how she would do that if she's already dead. She then realizes she hadn't thought of that. Mincheol prepares the bench press weights, and thinks she can probably handle 10 kilograms on each side. Han Jia sees the weights and asks if he really expects her to lift that, also saying that just the bar alone must weigh around 20 kilograms. Mincheol clarifies that, to be exact, it's 28 kilograms in total. The bar weighs 8 kilograms, and with the weights included, it adds up to 28. But he assures her that he's there to help lift it, and will make sure she doesn't get hurt. Then, he asks her not to worry and to trust him. Suddenly, her heart starts racing, and she wonders what's happening, and why it's happening now. Seeing Mincheol like this answers her question. He looks down at her, and seeing him like that makes her feel embarrassed. However, she decides to start the workout. While everyone else is training normally, Han Jia is sweating profusely from exertion, and wonders if this is how it's supposed to be. Mincheol instructs her to be careful while lowering the bar, inhaling slowly through her nose. The protagonist feels like her heart is going to explode and thinks it's not normal, but Mincheol says she's too tense and needs to focus on her breathing. She decides to ignore her heart for now and keep going. But seeing Mincheol, she concludes that she can't keep going, and wishes he would at least close his legs. Mincheol then notices her extra effort, and encourages her to keep it up. After finishing the bench press, Han Jia says she understands why her heart was beating so fast, saying it was due to the intense exercise, and that anyone's heart would race like that after working out that way. Jia also thinks about their relationship, while stretching her back, saying it's better to keep things as they are, rather than dwell on uncertainties. After that, she tosses her jacket aside, preferring to keep working out without it. Mincheol notices this, and calls her attention, putting the jacket back on her, with the jacket on her shoulders. She doesn't understand why Mincheol did that, and when she looks at him, she notices his awkwardness, calling his attention right after, and asking why he did that. Mincheol replies that she might catch a cold, since the weather has been getting colder lately, and if she wears thin clothes, there's a high chance of getting sick. If she gets sick after exercising, she might feel discouraged and stop training. Jia admits that's true and agrees to put the jacket back on, since catching a sudden cold is pretty bad. But soon after, she stops pretending to believe that and tells Mincheol he's talking nonsense, claiming it makes no sense to catch a cold from not wearing a jacket, since everyone else is training in light clothes, so they'd be just as susceptible to getting sick. Mincheol realizes she has a point. The protagonist notices something strange about him, and decides to tease him a bit. She then asks if wearing thin clothes bothers him, and makes him nervous in some way. In the most random way possible, Mincheol takes off his shirt, and Han Jia says he's crazy, insisting that Mincheol put his shirt back on. He asks if it bothers her, but Jia asks what kind of nonsense that is, saying she doesn't understand why it would bother her. Mincheol says he doesn't know about her, but it bothers him a lot, so he insists she stay properly dressed, and, as calmly as possible, helps her zip up her jacket. Realizing he was bothered, Jia complies, and after the workout, they walk home. After leaving the gym, Mincheol stayed quiet for the rest of the way. The protagonist grew worried about this, but thinking about it, Mincheol had always been like this. This reminds her of their childhood. Once, she injured one of her legs, but kept insisting she was fine. Even when Mincheol offered to carry her, she said she hadn't gotten hurt because of him, calling him stubborn. She also said it didn't make sense and asked how he would carry her all the way home, since he was much smaller than her. But Mincheol insisted he could do it. However, he couldn't live up to his words. Jia suggested they take a taxi or that he let her walk on her own, but Mincheol insisted on carrying her. And on that day, they spent about 2 hours on a 20-minute journey. Han Jia arrived home stressed and in pain, but when she looked at Mincheol, she thought he was someone stubborn and ignorant, yet she couldn't bring herself to hate him. Back in the present, Mincheol complimented her, saying she did a good job during training, and affirming they would work hard again the next day. Just imagining it made Han Jia apprehensive, but she took an unexpected action, and held Mincheol's hand, to walk back holding hands with him. Mincheol didn't understand her gesture, and asked why she was holding his hand. She responded that she just felt like it, and if it was a problem, he could let go. That night, for the first time, the protagonist thought that perhaps they weren't married just for the contract but also for love. Meanwhile, Jean Mincheol walked awkwardly, holding her hand. However, Han Jia couldn't think of anything else. She kept wondering if their bond could have started differently, but she concluded it was just another night spent thinking useless thoughts. Far away, in another place, inside a city restaurant, Yeonju was enjoying dinner with fine wine, accompanied by Na Yang-duk. The two were on some sort of date. Suddenly, Na Yang-duk told Yeonju that he had recently met Han Jia. Yeonju didn't like hearing this, and pretended not to recognize the name, but Na Yang-duk pointed out that there was only one Han Jiao they both knew. He said he was working a few days ago when he saw her and that her attitude hadn't changed. Na Yang-duk asked if she remembered the day the three of them first met, and when he gave his business card, which he had made himself. Yeonju apologized and said she didn't mind hearing about it, but she wanted to finish eating first, saying that she had been served premium meat, and meat always tastes bad when it gets cold. Duk forgot she didn't like talking during meals and apologized, but insisted he was talking about work. In his thoughts, he realized Yeonju was calmer than he had expected, and, looking at her, wondered if Yeonju had already moved on from that. The story shifted to Choy Sanhwa. It had been a while since he last appeared. He was as he always was, with birds chirping and flowers blooming. A flashback showed what happened the last time he and So Seon met. She had said that she too wished that day wouldn't be forgotten, both for her and for him. Then, So Seon wanted to say something but hesitated. Choy Sanhwa grew anxious and asked what she was going to do, and waited for her answer. However, So Seon backed out and said they should end it there, but Choy insisted she couldn't say that now. He said leaving someone curious was the worst thing to do and asked if she was looking for ways to make him angry. He told her she knew he wasn't the type to get mad about being rejected, so he wanted the truth, even if it was arrogant. So Seon admitted she knew this and was scared because of it, but she agreed to be honest, saying she was afraid their relationship would change. She said Choy knew about her bad personality, and that she wasn't good with people, and he was the only one she trusted to talk about moments like these. So, she was afraid of losing that, and also feared that a single sentence could destroy their relationship. Even so, she wanted to speak, but before finishing, Choy Sanhwa interrupted her, and said he understood she was scared and didn't want things to change but asked why she was afraid of that. Because she was the one who crossed the line first. He stated he remembered that day well, then confessed he liked her. He added it wasn't because of what happened that day and that he had liked her for a while, and one way or another, he would have told her someday and wanted to date her. In this case, that someday ended up being today. With that, he awaited her response. So Seon held his hand and thanked him for his confession. And that's how Choy Sanhwa ended up dating a girl at 29 years old. In summary, they agreed to date after that day. Back in the present, Jean Mincheol appeared, and felt uncomfortable hitching a ride with the two. After the light turned green, Choy drove forward, and during work hours, his colleagues noticed a change in his behavior, saying he was very focused that day. Choy knew he had his reasons for it, even commenting that the keyboard felt lighter. However, So Seon was still embarrassed, and even had lunch separately from him, only meeting after work, and speaking only through messages. The next day, Choy's excitement continues, and the routine repeats itself, with him meeting So Seon only at the farewell, and saying goodnight through messages. The same happens the next day. After work, they say goodbye, and send a goodnight message. Choy's excitement starts to fade. Soon, she goes to an after-work outing. When he gets home, he realizes he has fallen into a routine, similar to what they had before they started dating. 2 weeks have passed, and he hasn't noticed much difference. He remembers they have known each other for some time and wonders if this is right, but concludes it isn't. He thinks he needs to ask something, and on the other side, So Seon thinks the same. Both want to break the pattern they are stuck in. So Seon looks at her phone, and thinks Choy always sends messages first. Today, she wants to be the first. However, she is shocked when she sees the messages. Choy Sanhwa has the same reaction, as they ended up sending messages at the exact same time. This shatters any expectations they had. Choy notices the message he received, and sees that So Seon made a mistake in her text. He begins to wonder how he should interpret it. Choy takes a while to realize she just wanted to know if he was awake. But when So Seon tries to fix the message, she ends up making another mistake, and becomes frantic about it. She wonders why the E and P keys are so close together, regretting making the same mistake twice. She debates what to do but concludes he must have already seen it, and it's too late to delete. Then, she gets a call from him, making her even more desperate. Even so, she answers and says hello. Choy asks if she is free now. She replies that she is and asks what's up. Choy Sanhwa says he's awake, because that's what her message asked. Choy tries his best to stay respectful about her mistake. That effort proves to be very effective. It seems he knows So Seon well. She, in turn, is embarrassed by her mistake but thankful for Choy's thoughtfulness. But without realizing, she falls into 3 seconds of silence. This makes Choy think he did something wrong, wondering if he shouldn't have said anything and should have stayed quiet as usual. So Seon finally decides to speak, and confirms that she wanted to know if he was awake, because she was about to sleep and suddenly thought of him. This makes Choy think maybe he hasn't ruined everything. He asks if he disturbed her with the call, but So Seon says he didn't. Choy explains that he called because he couldn't fall asleep. So Seon says it's nice to hear his voice and that calling is always better than texting. He agrees, but then doesn't know what to say next. New couples often don't have much to talk about, and their conversation starts becoming awkward. Choy Sanhwa tries to fix this, knowing that the pattern was broken after 2 weeks. If it ends this way, they might fall back into a dull routine. So Suyeon also wants to say something but is too afraid, so she pretends to yawn, saying his voice is relaxing. Then, she starts rambling about random things to wrap up the conversation. She soon tells him to sleep well and that she'll see him tomorrow. But Choy gets ahead and invites her on a date. So Suyeon is surprised by such a sudden invitation, but Choy says it's been 2 whole weeks since they last went out. She realizes he's right, and asks when the date will be. Choy doesn't know what to do now, as he only made the invitation to avoid ending the call like that. In his desperation, he invites her to go out now, right after they hang up. So Suyeon is confused and asks if he knows what time it is. Choy Sanhwa replies that it's 11:38 at night, but says that doesn't matter, because if it's to meet her, there's no bad time, as he misses her. He asks if she would agree to go out if he visited, saying he can go right now. So Suyeon feels slightly annoyed, and tells him she's been meaning to say this for a while, pointing out it's rude to make unannounced visits, like he did last time. So, they end up setting another date instead. When the day of the date arrives, the chosen spot is the cinema. Choy uses his phone to check his appearance, until So Suyeon arrives, and apologizes for making him wait. But she shows up completely bundled up. Choy asks why she's dressed like that, and So Suyeon explains she was worried about running into someone they know there, so she asks if it was too much. Choy Sanhwa thinks she was adorably over the top and replies no, saying she looks like a celebrity. He also mentions that since it's the weekend, it might end up being uncomfortable to stay that way all the time, and in any case, there's a very low chance they'll run into someone they know. But to their surprise, he ends up encountering Han Jia. However, upon seeing her, he is captivated. After all, he's been a long-time fan. His girlfriend, on the other hand, is not pleased and hides behind him. They quickly realize they've landed in an awkward situation. Choy is at a loss for words, and an uncomfortable silence fills the space. The protagonist decides to break the ice, saying he must be there to watch a movie. After all, she took advantage of the weekend for the same reason, though she didn't expect to see them there. Choy greets her and tries to remain polite, thinking about how his first date at the movies has coincided with running into his colleague's wife. He asks if Jia likes watching movies, and she responds that she does. However, Han Jia soon notices the girl hiding behind him. This is exactly what So Suyeon didn't want, and she tries to slip away unnoticed. Choy quickly catches on and signals to Han Jia to pretend she didn't see her, though she doesn't understand why. But soon, she recalls their earlier conversation and concludes that this must be the woman he mentioned before. Han Jia is glad they seem to have reconciled, because the brother of a friend, who once sought her advice about someone, seems to have reached the dating stage, and the girl resembles someone she knows. So she tells Choy he managed it, though he insists it's not what she thinks. So Suyeon tugs on his shirt, and asks what they should do. He replies that they should leave first. Han Jia remarks that it's not even nighttime yet, and wishes him a good day, leaving Choy utterly flustered. Afterward, he heads to the restroom, and wonders why, of all places, they had to run into Jia there. He hadn't anticipated how awkward it would be to meet someone he knows on a date. So Suyeon asks if that was Jin Minchio's wife. He replies yes and admits he didn't expect to meet her there. His girlfriend says it might seem a bit rude, but she mentions that they looked close and asks if he knew her before. However, Choy does something unexpected for her, and ends up hugging So Suyeon. She doesn't understand what he's doing, but she finds herself liking the embrace. With a packet of Spaghetti Man's tomato sauce in hand, Jin Minchio appears, delighted he managed to buy one, and thinks it would have been nice if Han Jia had come to buy it with him. Choy Sanhwa notices his colleague approaching and hides with his girlfriend. So Suyeon takes a deep breath, and Choy pulls back slightly. So Suyeon realizes her breathing is warm, and her heart is racing. She wonders how long they stayed like that, as it felt like their lips might touch if they weren't careful. But she thinks about what would happen if they accidentally touched. They end up pulling away at the last second. To cover up, Choy Sanhwa comments that it's really hot there. So Suyeon agrees, saying the ventilation in the open space might not be working, and wonders if the air conditioning in the cinema is functional. Choy suggests skipping the movie and invites her to eat something refreshing since it's hot. So Suyeon agrees. They head to a restaurant that's popular on social media. A couple near them comments that the food lives up to its reputation, and suggests scheduling the next company meeting there. What Choy didn't expect was that these people work at the same place as him. After eating, the couple goes to a karaoke spot, but even there, they encounter a colleague from his department. They decide to go to a famous romantic cafe instead. However, the place is closed, and Choy wonders why all this is happening today. He asks So Suyeon why they're running into so many coworkers on the weekend. She responds that she's not sure and that maybe people just don't want to stay home. While eating, So Suyeon ends up getting her face dirty, and Choy cleans it for her, Afterward, he licks the remaining ice cream from his finger, but realizes he's done something strange in front of her. So Suyeon asks why he did that, and he simply replies that he didn't notice. Still, he feels happy. He knows it's time to end the date, but he doesn't want it to end just yet. The two had done everything Choy had prepared in advance, and now he can't think of anything to say. Even though he doesn't want to end it yet, he knows he has to stop for now. So, he pulls over and asks if she wants to go inside. So Suyeon feels extremely embarrassed about this, but Choy doesn't understand why, until he looks at the sign of the place, and realizes he didn't stop where he intended to. Becoming completely shocked by his blunder, Choy Sanhwa notices the huge mistake he made, and tries to think of a solution, but his mind goes blank. Regardless, he grabs So Suyeon by the arm, and quickly takes her away from there. So Suyeon blushes slightly, and asks if the place Choy wanted to enter was a claw machine arcade. Choy responds yes, it couldn't have been anywhere else. In his mind, Choy thinks he's saved, since the arcade is close to the other location. Knowing that So Suyeon almost got upset over his mistake, he quickly came up with this. Even though people these days move fast, taking her to that other place on their first date would be too much. It's better to take things step by step. However, he remembers that they've already spent the night together, and when he looks at So Suyeon, she seems disappointed. This leaves Choy unsure of what to do. But So Suyeon wasn't disappointed. She was just embarrassed, thinking she was the only one having strange thoughts. Choy Sanhwa calls her over, and positions her in front of the claw machine. At moments like this, he wants to show his manly side. Then, he asks if she remembers that the fox plushie was the one she wanted. But So Suyeon doesn't remember saying that. Choy says she mentioned it during the team dinner, and even spent 50,000 won trying to get it, but still failed. When he passed by earlier, he noticed it was the same fox. So, he offers to get it for her, and So Suyeon finds his enthusiasm amusing. Choy thinks the mood is improving, and his excuse was a good one, too. This might be his chance, he thinks. Up until now, there were some slightly disappointing moments, but this is a great opportunity to be remembered as a thoughtful guy who notices details. Super motivated, Choy convinces himself he can do it, because he wants to impress So Suyeon with the plushie. However, he ends up spending 120,000 won on unsuccessful attempts. In the end, the arcade manager gives him a similar plushie. It even has a friendly note saying he could just buy it if he couldn't win. And because he overdid it, Choy gets scolded by her. In other words, he feels defeated, and wonders why everything is going wrong today. In the end, he didn't even get to watch the movie, nor did he taste the food they ate. The whole course of their date was a mess, because of all the mistakes throughout the day. Thus, Choy concludes the date was a disaster. He feels frustrated, having prepared so much for the first date, only to feel like he wasted one of So Suyeon's weekends. A little while later they walk until they reach her house. Choy didn't want it to end this way, as he was so excited for this day, and things didn't go as planned. Before saying goodbye, he apologizes for not making it a good date. He admits it didn't go as planned and that he still wants to give her a great time. But to his surprise, So Suyeon says she doesn't know what he's thinking, but she actually had a lot of fun. She regrets not watching the movie or getting to enjoy the coffee, but somehow liked the cold noodles and the thrill of avoiding her coworkers. It was exciting. She concludes by saying that, in the end, she really enjoyed the date, to the point that it's a shame to go home. In a way, Choy Sanhwa feels relieved, telling her to look forward to their next date, because he's determined to get that fox plushie with his own effort. And as for the next date, he promises it will be even bigger. Even though today wasn't entirely satisfying, next time will be better. So Suyeon tells him to keep his voice down, as someone might overhear and misunderstand. After dropping So Suyeon off at her house, Choy Sanhwa goes to his parents' house, and arrives full of emotion, saying he loves everyone and hugging them. His mother thinks it's strange, he hasn't visited in a while, and now he shows up unannounced. She wonders why. Meanwhile, at her home, So Suyeon looks at her plushies, and thinks she got another one, feeling happy even though Choy didn't manage to win the one she wanted. So Suyeon thinks he's always like this, saying nothing and just smiling. She jumps onto her bed with her stuffed toys, blushing as she thinks about Choy. Meanwhile, at the same time, in another place, Mincheol and Jia are watching one of the Noodle Man movies. The rat is asleep on Jia. Mincheol is dozing off leaning against the couch, and Han Jia is the only one awake, feeling super uncomfortable, because she just realized where she had laid down. Before this, Jia had called Mincheol, inviting him to the cinema to watch Star Wars. Upon arriving at the cinema, Jia said she was on a diet but still ordered the largest combo available, despite Mincheol warning her about the calories. And that's how they ended up suddenly watching the movie, and on the same day, the protagonist encountered Choy Sanhwa and his girlfriend. Her biggest issue was that the movie was terrible, and she got super bored, ending up blaming her sister, saying she knew the movie was bad yet still recommended it. Thus, she plans to take her revenge soon. Shortly after this unfortunate incident, back at their home, Mincheol notices that Jia is already watching another movie. However, Han Jia says that what they watched earlier couldn't be considered a movie, and now she wants to watch a real one. Meanwhile, she tells Mincheol he can do whatever he wants and asks if he hadn't said he bought a new game. But that's how the afternoon movie marathon for two resumed for unknown reasons. The protagonist wonders what's wrong with Mincheol, as he's sitting next to her so naturally, except for the fact that he's eating carrots and cucumbers instead of popcorn, which aren't even fried. However, she suddenly realizes that when she watches a movie randomly, she ends up eating whatever is in front of her without thinking too much. And so, the two ended up watching a movie. After that, they watched a second movie, and by the third movie, Han Jia began to fall asleep. Then, she dozed off without even realizing it, shutting down as if she were a TV. When she woke up, she noticed the situation she was in. Not only had she fallen asleep, but so had Mincheol and the rat. Additionally, she found herself in an embarrassing position. Jean Mincheol also woke up and noticed she was no longer sleeping. Soon, he asked if she slept well. Then, the protagonist let out a scream and jumped up in a panic. Mincheol was confused by her reaction, and asked what she was doing. Han Jia replied that she was exercising. She asked how long she had slept on his lap. Jean Mincheol replied that it had been about an hour, making her even more embarrassed. He said he also ended up falling asleep and thought that 4 movies in one day were too much. However, Jia could only think about how vulnerable she must have looked sleeping like that. Mincheol asked if she wanted to continue from where the movie left off, but she replied no, saying she had seen the movies before. After that, she didn't know how to react, and thought that, despite having slept for a while, Jean Mincheol had also slept. The worst thing that could have happened at that moment would have been a kiss, but thinking about it made her incredibly nervous, and she stood up, saying she was just stretching. She tried to convince herself that nothing had happened, but to be sure, she decided to ask. So she asked Jean Mincheol if anything had happened while she was sleeping. In response, Jean Mincheol said a lot had happened, and she was shocked. But he was referring to the movie, and the protagonist felt relieved because she knew how he was and that he wouldn't have hidden it if something had actually happened. Looking at him, Jia thought that not even Jean Mincheol's mother could guess what he was thinking. The most important thing about Mincheol was that he didn't show his emotions. She tried to recall a time when he had expressed any emotion, and concluded that the only time was when she asked to train with him. With that, she stopped thinking about it out of fear of concluding that, to Jean Mincheol, training was more important than her. But now that she was thinking about it, it was starting to get on her nerves, and she wondered why it seemed like she was the only one suffering. Jia concluded that it was always her who suggested going somewhere, even the kiss and the marriage proposal. Han Jia concluded that this mistake was truly hers, but she grew frustrated because she was the only one feeling this way, and it was really irritating her. Afterward, she stretched out on the couch and placed her feet on Jean Mincheol. He asked what she was doing. Han Jia replied that she just wanted to stretch, and her legs were a bit long. Jean Mincheol grew suspicious of her, but the protagonist was simply in the mood to tease him a little, and even tugged at his shirt with her toes. Even though she insists she's not doing anything special, Mincheol says he knows there must be a reason for her behavior. The protagonist insists that not everything needs a reason and that she's just doing it because she wants to. Immediately, she gets caught off guard, and Jean Mincheol says that if that's the case, he'll do what he wants to. Han Jia asks why he's suddenly touching her feet, but he uses her same technique and says there's no reason. After that, he starts commenting on how neglected her feet are and how it bothered him seeing her stretch earlier, saying that's just not enough. Jia feels uncomfortable with his sudden action but starts laughing because she's ticklish on her feet. Mincheol says she must have never had a foot massage before and tells her to bear with it just a little longer because he's almost done. She asks if he's sure he knows what he's doing and if there's no hidden motive behind this, also telling him to be gentle. Mincheol says that if he presses a certain spot and she feels pain, it means her lungs aren't in good condition, and he asks why she doesn't stop smoking. The protagonist says it's not that she doesn't want to, but that she can't, reminding him she already told him that before. At this point, she's starting to enjoy the massage, and is appreciating Jean Mincheol's foot massage skills. Jia says he's really good at it, and he replies that he's actually learned how to do it properly. In her thoughts, the protagonist concludes he's been good at this kind of thing since they were kids, though back then it was shoulder massages. She takes the opportunity to enjoy the moment to the fullest. Suddenly, she feels a sharp pain, causing her to sit up on the couch, only to find herself face to face with Mincheol, once again in an awkward position, similar to the moment they almost kissed before. Jean Mincheol holds Han Jia, but he feels very embarrassed because he didn't expect this to happen. The protagonist isn't much different. They stare at each other up close, their faces just inches apart. Jia tries to pull away from Mincheol and face him properly. Mincheol doesn't quite know how to react. In the protagonist's mind, her emotions are in conflict. She doesn't know whether to stay or leave, but she decides to follow her instincts. However, on her way, she starts feeling a cramp in her foot. The word for cramp in Korean sounds similar to mouse, and Jean Mincheol tries to lighten the situation, but the way he goes about it is rather strange to Jia. He starts joking, pretending to be a cat, and says that since she has a mouse around, she should find a cat to catch it. Han Jia tells him to stop explaining the joke because it only makes things worse. She heads to the bathroom to wash her face, thinking how embarrassing this whole situation is, and wondering why she's always the one who feels flustered. Jia suspects Mincheol is the type of person who likes to do embarrassing things just to see people's reactions. She recalls that on their honeymoon, he wore a very ridiculous outfit, and she wonders if he did it on purpose to irritate her. But that's not really the issue, because they were about to kiss again. That atmosphere, the close proximity. However, she wants to stop thinking about it, because a kiss should happen under better circumstances. Deep down, she knows the atmosphere was right, the moment was right, and the tension was there. She wonders what Mincheol thinks about it, because she doesn't believe he was against the idea of kissing her. But he could also just lean in and get it over with. Once again, she finds herself expecting something from someone like Mincheol, whom she considers a frustrating guy, thinking that if he knew how to act in moments like this, he would have already crossed the line. For a brief moment, she tastes something bitter, like cucumbers, and she doesn't remember eating any cucumbers at all. But she remembers that Mincheol ate some. Then, Han Jia also remembers that she fell asleep on his lap, and starts wondering what Mincheol might have done, touching her lip and recalling the way he looked down at her, adjusted her face, stared at her slightly open mouth, leaned in slowly, and might have taken advantage of the moment to kiss her. She isn't sure because she can't distinguish dream from reality, and she doesn't want to make assumptions too quickly. But that doesn't explain the bitter taste lingering on her lips, because the taste is undeniable. The day dawns at the house, and Han Jia goes to speak with Mincheol before he leaves, asking again just to be sure and bringing up the moment she fell asleep during the movie, questioning whether or not something really happened. And she also asks him to swear on his heart that nothing happened, and Mincheol does so. The protagonist still feels doubtful, and questions him again about the seriousness of the matter. Mincheol turns around and says once more that nothing happened. Jia thinks his reaction is suspicious and concludes he definitely did something at that moment. Mincheol, however, says he's going to be late and needs to leave quickly. The protagonist notes that he's acting shy and even finds it cute, deciding she should keep asking about it for a few days just to enjoy his reactions. At least, that's what she thought at first, because, after that day, Mincheol started avoiding her like the plague. He began leaving earlier and, when he returned, would lock himself in his room. They had agreed to respect each other's requests for privacy, but this felt more like he was completely avoiding having any conversation with Jia, and this went on for 4 days. Mincheol even skipped a day at the gym. Han Jia never thought she'd live to see such a day. She couldn't imagine he would do such a thing. However, she takes it as his initiative to start a fight, thinking that if he wants to fight, then she'll give him one. With that, she begins crafting a message capable of striking fear into any human. But she ends up surprised. As Mincheol calls her, she answers, asking what he wants, but she's caught off guard by what he says. After that, she leaves the house to meet up with him. The protagonist ends up arriving at a bar and sees Mincheol passed out on the table. Choy Sanhua is next to him, begging her to do something. Jia starts evaluating the situation. A table set for 2 people. Judging by the number of bottles, each person drank about 3. It's likely they went to the bar straight after work. Choy Sanhua is unconscious, and based on his red face, he seems to have drunk a lot. But the likelihood that he initiated the drinking session is low. So, the probability that Choy is the problem is high. Situation assessed, and problem analysis complete. Thus, she wants to scold Choy Sanhua, saying he left Mincheol in this state and forcibly called someone who can't even drink. However, Choy insists it was the opposite, and that there was no way he could force Mincheol to drink, given that he even refuses drinks from the company director. He adds that Jia should know this well. She does know that Mincheol prioritizes his muscles above all else. Afterward, she takes Mincheol and puts him in a taxi. On the way, she reflects on the situation, and recalls what Choy said, that Mincheol had been acting strangely in recent days, to the point that it didn't even seem like him, as he made several small mistakes and appeared unfocused. Choy speculated they might have fought or something similar. Seeing Mincheol passed out in the car, she wonders what could have caused this, since she knows they hadn't fought. Jia even thinks that a fight would have been better. Suddenly, Mincheol wakes up in the taxi, and startles even the driver. He tries to hug her, asking if she's really Jia. Mincheol, in his own way, recognizes her voice. However, the protagonist tries to push him away, saying he's disgusting when drunk. He even tries to kiss her, but after being rejected, he asks if he can't. Jia responds no. He then says that's strange. Even though Han Jia doesn't understand, he brings up their first kiss, recalling that she mentioned a kiss depends on the person offering it. The protagonist says he's bringing up things she never said, but Mincheol insists he heard exactly that from her. Han Jia corrects him, affirming that what she said was that a service depends on the person offering it, not a kiss. Mincheol asks if there's a difference. Jia insists there's a huge difference between a kiss and services. With that, Mincheol concludes that giving a kiss is a form of service and doesn't count as a normal kiss. Jia thinks this is utter nonsense but recognizes he's using it to counter her own previous nonsense. Then, Mincheol tries to kiss her again, and Jia tries to escape his advances. The driver, seeing this, asks if they're newlyweds, and comments that they're adorable, reminding him of when he was newly married. After noticing a mark on her hand, the driver asks if they'd been married for just 2 months. But the protagonist knows it hasn't even been half a year since they got married. Now, they're heading home with her drunk husband showing affection in public. With that, she realizes anyone would think they're a cute couple and feels embarrassed for never having considered it before. The driver says her husband seems to love her very much. Jia isn't used to hearing that word, but she knows that, technically, it's true, and she realizes she is a 32-year-old embarrassed woman who, somehow, is now conscious of the word husband. Thinking it over, she knows that Mincheol has occasionally called her wife. She ends up venting, saying that Mincheol is an enemy to her, someone who only frustrates her and never listens. The driver asks if they had a fight. Han Jia replies no, but it would have been better if they had, as it would have made her feel more relieved. She then asks if she can change the trip's destination, and the taxi driver says yes. He calls her ma'am, and she's startled because it's the first time someone has addressed her that way. The taxi driver assures her that, regardless, her husband loves her, but she thinks that statement is dangerous and doesn't want to hear it anymore. Sometime after they arrive at the destination, Mincheol slowly opens his eyes and sees a Ferris wheel. He's still waking up little by little. The protagonist asks him if he's awake. Mincheol is confused, not fully understanding what's going on, while Jia just smiles at him. She says she's only asking out of curiosity, and wonders if he remembers what happened in the taxi, but Mincheol doesn't even understand why she's in front of him. Soon, she realizes he remembers nothing. Congratulating him for surviving, Mincheol asks about the taxi, as he doesn't remember getting into one or even knows where they are. Han Jia tells him they're on a Ferris wheel right now and that she wants to show him something interesting. She shows him a bracelet on her wrist, saying it's the unlimited pass ticket for the amusement park, which is used to signal through the Ferris wheel window to indicate they want to stay on when it's not crowded. Mincheol asks what she's trying to say. Jia stretches her foot toward him, startling him. She tells him he won't be able to get off and that the two of them will be going around for several hours until she's satisfied. The protagonist asks if he remembers passing out after drinking, saying that no matter how she looks at it, she thinks the reason he drank was because of her. She reminds him of Clause 5 of the contract, which states that if there's a complaint, they must talk. So, she says she has a complaint and needs to talk too, but someone keeps running away and drinking instead. Since she took care of him, that should be enough. Mincheol tries to justify himself, but she doesn't want to hear any excuses, telling him the real game of truth or dare starts now. From the top of the Ferris wheel, Mincheol says he doesn't know what she means. She explains it's a game where you answer a question honestly or face a dare if you refuse to answer. She adds that normally they drink, but instead, she'll use flicks to the forehead, and if he lies, the game ends. Mincheol shields his forehead, and she doesn't understand his reaction, saying a flick shouldn't hurt that much but then remembering the kiss she gave on his forehead. With that, she tells him not to imagine strange things because she won't go easy on him this time, warning that if he doesn't answer truthfully, she'll flick him without hesitation. Mincheol agrees to being flicked but isn't keen on playing the game, as being too honest in his answers might make someone look stupid. The protagonist says she doesn't know where he learned that, but she won't lie, even if it means dying because of this game. Mincheol asks why. She says she has old memories she'd like to forget, and if he's curious, he can ask about them during the game. Anyway, whatever he wants to ask, she promises not to lie and says he shouldn't waste this opportunity, because he can ask whatever he wants, and this might be the first and last chance he gets to flick her. Mincheol asks who goes first. Jia responds that, although she wants to go first, she wants to be fair at a moment like this, and suggests playing rock paper scissors. Jia wins, so she gets the first question. Right away, she asks Mincheol if he likes her. He freezes, but Jia tells him not to pretend he didn't hear and starts a countdown. As she counts, Mincheol doesn't answer, and ends up getting flicked on the forehead. She tells him not to overreact, but Mincheol insists it's not an overreaction. When it's his turn, he throws the same question back at her, but Han Jia simply replies that she doesn't hate him. Mincheol wasn't expecting such an answer. However, The protagonist blushes at that moment, and tries to elaborate further, but Minchyo doesn't seem too comfortable, and she asks if he has any complaints. He tries to clarify the situation about whether he hated it or not, but Jia insists it's one question at a time. Now it's her turn. She brings up the taste of cucumber, saying that on the day they watched the movie in the living room, she tasted cucumber on her lips, even though she hadn't eaten any, and claims that he knows this well. She also points out that after that day, Minchyo started avoiding her, and her question is about that, asking if he touched her lips while she was sleeping. He doesn't respond, and Jia asks if she should be more specific, saying directly that he kissed her while she was asleep. Judging by Minchyo's reaction, she concludes that he didn't do it, but she insists on hearing it from him, saying that until he answers, she will keep asking about it. Minchyo then responds that he didn't do it. Jia then says this concludes the game, and thanks him for his time. Minchyo asks why, and she explains that she warned she would end the game if there were lies, and since it depends on Minchyo's conscience, it would feel strange for him to lie about something that didn't happen that way. If he says it isn't a lie, she says she'll just accept it, and assume she imagined it while sleeping and ended up tasting cucumbers, and that nothing happened between them. However, Minchyo says he didn't do it on her lips, and it's not a lie. Just as she said she wouldn't lie, Minchyo states he also doesn't want to lie to her, so he admits he kissed her, but not on the lips, instead on her forehead, the same way she once did to him. The protagonist is surprised by this response, and asks why he did it that way. Minchyo replies that he didn't mean to, but she had fallen asleep, and he knew he shouldn't have done it, but while looking at her face, without knowing why, he ended up kissing her. For that, he apologizes. Jia, however, laughs at the situation and tells him there's no need to apologize, finding the whole situation amusing and leaving Minchyo embarrassed. Now she knows the kiss wasn't on her lips but on her forehead, and she's annoyed that this whole mess happened over something so trivial, concluding that she should be the one to apologize. In her thoughts, she wonders what she's waiting for because Minchyo, with that frustrating face, couldn't even cross the line. But the fact that he kissed her forehead might mean something, like he was trying his best or something like that. Thinking about this embarrasses her and leaves her feeling disappointed, and she concludes it's because she wasn't expecting this. She wanted something more. Minchyo apologizes again, but she insists he doesn't need to and that she should be the one feeling bad about all of this, adding that their relationship isn't that kind of relationship. But Minchyo explains that the reason he's apologizing isn't for what happened that day, because now he's about to do something he truly should apologize for. He recalls her saying that one should only kiss someone they want to kiss. The protagonist thinks that he might have overheard her earlier words. Fireworks light up the sky, and people near the park admire the many colorful explosions. However, the protagonist's eyes shine for another reason, because Minchyo finally takes the steps she's been waiting for. For the protagonist, flowers have bloomed. In her mind, they are fire flowers, so late at night, burning brightly, wave after wave, inside the Ferris wheel cabin. There, Minchyo moves toward her and kisses her, something she had been waiting for quite some time. But what he thinks in that moment is that the taste of his kiss is bitter like cucumber. She imagines he must have eaten one earlier, as it leaves that lingering sensation in her mouth. The sensation almost feels like eating. There's also the faint smell of alcohol. Jia doesn't know whether to think about what he ate for dinner, or to focus on the current moment they are sharing, but she can't help herself and pulls away, making a disgusted face right in front of him. She's about to say something rude, when Minchyo surprises her by hugging her. She complains that the place is filthy, and asks if he's suddenly lost his mind. However, from all the stress, Minchyo ends up passing out in her arms. Time passes with them inside the cabin, and outside, the staff wait for the passengers to leave. But when they look toward the couple's cabin, all they see is Jia's hand, pressed against a fogged-up window. Due to the intense heat inside, she presses her face against the window, begging for help because she can't bear Minchyo's weight. That day finally came, the one she nicknamed her first drinking crisis. Because of what happened, they added a new clause to their contract. Before signing the document, Minchyo looks at Han Jia. She asks what's wrong and tells him that if there's a problem, he should speak up now. He says he has no complaints, and Jia tells him to keep writing. With mutual agreement, the sixth clause was added to the contract. Kissing after eating cucumbers is prohibited, as the protagonist finds the bitter taste extremely unpleasant, and doesn't want to experience it every time they kiss. Before heading out for another workday, Minchyo asks if they're really leaving things as they are. She asks what the problem is, but Minchyo replies that there isn't one. He just thought she'd be angrier with him, but that's not Minchyo's real concern. He then brings up the rule about kissing before eating cucumbers not being prohibited, and asks if that means as long as he hasn't eaten cucumbers before. Han Jia, embarrassed, interrupts him and simply tells him to leave already. At work, Minchyo applies ice to his forehead. While talking to Choy Sanwoo, he says he got very drunk last night, and feels bad about it. Choy reassures him, saying nothing major happened and that he's glad Mincheol is okay. But he notices the mark on his forehead and asks what happened. Mincheol explains that he got flicked. His colleague asks about his morning, and Mincheol briefly explains what happened. Choy concludes that it was a good idea to call Han Jia and ask her to take him home. Speaking of her, while Mincheol is out, Jia takes the chance to tidy up the house. While cleaning, she thinks about him and how he always speaks word for word, leaving her embarrassed every time. The cat jumps on her, wanting to play, but Jia is focused on cleaning, saying she can't get distracted now. Even so, the cat walks all over Jia, despite her insistence that it stop. Suddenly, her phone rings, but she realizes it's just a notification, urgently informing her that her stocks have plummeted. After that, she comes across some charts, and panics when she sees them. The protagonist is not just a freelancer who does nothing, but one who doesn't need to work. With royalties from her books and dividends from her investments, she lives a life where her monthly allowance and living expenses are covered. That's why she doesn't take on work and only wants to figure out her future. Jia considers herself a grasshopper sitting on a pile of money, but it seems that's about to be a thing of the past, because when she checks her phone, she concludes it must be broken, since she doesn't understand why her stocks are dropping so drastically. Still, she tries to stay calm, and for now, just wants to wait. Even though, in times like this, she could just sell, she knows investing isn't something that can be done in a day or two. But soon, she realizes this situation isn't like anything she's seen before. 4 days later, the stocks have fallen even more, and she sinks into the couch, worrying Mincheol. He asks her to sit in a more comfortable position to breathe, but Jia insists she's comfortable as she is. To her, nothing makes sense, and she wonders why the stocks are falling when nothing negative happened. Soon, she reads that divorces are dividing properties, and it drives her crazy, as she doesn't understand why this trend is becoming so unstable and concludes that they should consider their investors. The protagonist doesn't want to think about it anymore and decides to sell. The next morning, she checks her stocks, and is surprised to see they've skyrocketed, getting furious that she sold them the day before. If she'd known this would happen, she definitely wouldn't have sold. Her frustration is so intense that she shouts angry words without holding back. Mincheol sees her like this and asks what's wrong. She says it's nothing, and tells him she's going out for a bit. Mincheol asks if she's going to eat, but she insists she's fine and that he can eat first. Jia tries to calm herself down, telling herself that this happens often in investing, that there are times when you're up and times when you're down, and that's just life. The problem was that she turned off her phone for a while, and if she'd kept watching the numbers go up and down, she wouldn't have sold. Her fear was so overwhelming that it stopped her from thinking clearly about what to do. She remembers a saying, "Every crisis is a new opportunity." At this point, she considers taking the risk of buying, thinking that even though it's risky, now might be the best time. However, the market is not going as she hoped. She ends up buying when it's expensive and selling when it's cheap. She even stops training at the gym to check the value statistics and realizes that her current earnings are less than her initial capital. Mincheol notices she's standing still and asks if she isn't going to train. However, she doesn't want him to know about it and says she will train. Then he asks if she has started playing some new game recently, because he only sees her glued to her phone. This leaves her wondering, and the protagonist asks herself if she can even consider this a game, as her account is being destroyed in real time. Mincheol says that if everything is okay, he'd like to play too, as he's excited about her engagement with it. Han Jia doesn't know what to do. She realizes she's worrying Mincheol and wonders if she should tell him the truth, but she concludes that she cannot do that. This is the reason they can maintain their relationship. After all, both have their own work and should be responsible for it, besides having the rule of not interfering in each other's personal matters. She feels bad for making him worry like this, and if he finds out about her current situation, with his personality, it will definitely only get worse. So she decides to lie to him, thinking that this way, she won't worry him. She says it's nothing serious, just a new drama that has become popular recently. After that, she goes back to training, saying that she came there for that and should give her best today as well. Already at home, she sees that her current earnings are very concerning, and now she can't put her phone down as the numbers are updated in real time. She is already considering selling again but fears that the same thing will happen all over again. Meanwhile, she remembers Mincheol, feeling bad for lying to him. Soon she concludes that she doesn't want to live like this anymore. She then decides to take drastic action and deletes the stock trading app, because she doesn't want to worry about it anymore. How was her day after that? To summarize, it might have been better to have sold everything on the first day, as the stocks kept dropping day after day following that controversy. This makes her feel somewhat relieved, knowing that she would have lost money anyway. She even thinks her account has become a Schrodinger's cat situation. Either way, that's how her days of living off her allowance just by breathing ended. This made her start looking for a job, Jean Mincheol appears with some sliced apples and says he wants to consult her about something. Han Jia feels uncertain about it, because suddenly, Mincheol is acting so serious just to consult her, and she imagines something is wrong. She just hopes it's nothing bad and starts getting worried. Jia already starts doing some mental calculations about how much she spends per month, since she and Mincheol share all their living expenses equally. However, it's not about finances that Mincheol wants to talk about now. Then, he asks if there's someone she likes. Han Jia even sets the apples aside, because she's baffled by such a question, and asks what he's talking about. Mincheol reveals that some time ago, he watched a video on YouTube about a couple, and it said that if your partner is behaving strangely, there might be a reason. He even lists some topics mentioned, such as avoiding conversations, desperately hiding the phone, going out frequently, and feeling restless all day. All the items were confirmed in Jia, and Mincheol considers that she might be lying to him. The protagonist feels outraged. However, Mincheol mentions that she said some time ago that she was watching a new drama at the gym, and he says that, without realizing it, she has a habit. Whenever she's having fun, she shares the moments with someone. But the drama she mentioned that day, Mincheol never even heard the title, and that's why he became suspicious. The protagonist realizes that this entire situation has created a misunderstanding, so she concludes that there's nothing else to do, and decides to tell him the truth. Han Jia is honest but feels ashamed to say it out loud. Mincheol is shocked to hear how much she lost. However, she isn't sure if she actually lost it, and because she didn't want to see, she deleted the app and hasn't checked since. In any case, that's the reason she's been acting strange, as that money was the source of her living allowance. Not wanting to worry him, she didn't tell him before and apologizes for having made him uneasy. Even so, Mincheol remains worried, and he asks if Jia is okay. Since she lost a fortune, she might be worried about expenses, but that's not the case. Jia says that money comes and goes, and she has a healthy body to work. Being honest with herself, she knows she isn't truly that calm and imagines no one else would be in her position. And putting money aside, even though she may seem like someone who lost a lot because of fluctuations in the stock market, what bothers her most is being misunderstood by Mincheol, but it seems he hasn't noticed that. Due to the way Jia reacted, he concludes she's still worried about expenses and offers to cover most of their shared costs, but Jia insists it's unnecessary, saying she can handle the problem herself and take responsibility. Han Jia says she knew Mincheol would react this way, which is why she didn't tell him anything, and that financial management should be equal among family members. Mincheol says he's fine with that, and adds that it's not like their expenses are that high. Jia says she isn't rejecting his sincerity, but it's simply a matter of her pride. Han Jia explains that she decided to do something when she left her house, and wants to contribute through her own efforts. The protagonist wanted to boast about never asking anyone for help in her life, but this is the first time she's failed at that. She says she doesn't know if Mincheol can trust her since she's unemployed, but she still wants to collaborate with him. Mincheol reassures her, saying he fully trusts her, and has never thought she was someone untrustworthy. So far, not even once has that thought crossed his mind. However, he says this while holding her ears, which leaves Jia extremely flustered. She punches his forehead and asks why he grabbed her ears out of nowhere. Mincheol replies that it's an energy injection. Jia asks what he's talking about. Mincheol explains that it used to be a popular thing back in the day. If she held his ear, she'd inject energy, and if he shouted, he could share the energy with her. The protagonist starts to recall this. Then, Mincheol says that, even though she doesn't want financial support, he still wants to support her in some way. He asks if the amount of energy he's giving is acceptable. Han Jia, thoroughly embarrassed, thanks him, and runs to her room. She holds her ears, still unable to believe what Mincheol just did, wondering how many years it's been since the last time they played that game. When they were kids, Jia used to play with him like that without giving it much thought. However, what she didn't expect was that it would cheer her up more than she remembered. A week passes. This time, the protagonist wakes up before Mincheol. He asks if Jia is heading to an interview, and she replies that she has 2 scheduled. Mincheol wishes her good luck, and tells her to take care. The protagonist feels encouraged by his support, and thanks him, saying she'll be back soon. To be honest, she's grateful for how lucky she's been so far, studying, working, and even getting married. Every time she pulls herself together, her life, at 32 years old, has always seemed to work out like a dream. However, it can't always be that way, because that's how reality works. That's why she's fighting to find a job, determined to start now. But what she least expected is about to happen. A long time ago, on a small mountain, there was a hardworking woodcutter, and a fairy who lost her winged robe and became unable to return to heaven, having to live with the woodcutter as her husband. One day, she appears and says that, while cleaning the house, she found her winged robe she had lost, and she asks if he thinks it's beautiful. She mentions how the darkest place is really under the lamp and that she never expected to find it in the blanket cabinet, wondering who left it there. That's right, the woodcutter was the one who hid her fairy robe. He knew the legends that said fairies couldn't return to heaven without their robes and would have to live among humans. But it seems the fairy was already aware of this. To be honest, she had known ever since she moved into the house where her robe was hidden, and it had been quite some time. She asks how it ended up in the blanket cabinet, and suggests her husband hid it there because he wanted to keep her with him, and didn't want her to return to heaven. The woodcutter admits that everything she said is true and that he's been thinking about how regretful he feels. He confesses that he made a big mistake under the pretense of his love for her and asks for forgiveness. The fairy says that if he does her a favor, there is nothing she cannot forgive. She says that from now on, she is going to confiscate his glasses. The woodsman says he cannot work without them, becoming desperate for his glasses that fell into the water. She says he can no longer use them. Then, the fairy asks how her husband can be so naive. She says she's telling him that she doesn't like the glasses he wears, but as for his clothes with or without wings, she doesn't care. To be honest, she doesn't want to go back either, except because of his stupid glasses. Her husband asks if she's serious. The fairy says whether it's true or not, he wouldn't be able to tell from looking at it from the beginning. She holds her husband's face, pulling him in for a kiss. But before it happens, the mountain god appears, saying he's there to return the glasses he was looking for. He presents a few pairs of glasses, but Han Jia shouts that none of them are his. Soon, people in the hospital begin to stare at her, realizing she's finally woken up. The protagonist realizes it was all just a dream, but still imagines the conclusion, saying that's how the two became the moon and the star in the sky, started a rice cake business, and sold them to tigers. The end. After that, she makes a call. She tells her mother that she was in a car accident, but she says it wasn't too serious, and a truck just lightly bumped into her. Her mother becomes worried, but Jia insists she's fine, saying the hit was light and the vehicle stopped immediately. She also says she doesn't know why she fainted and thinks maybe it's because she's been so tired lately, as she's been looking for a job a lot recently. At the hospital, Han Jia says that even though it was a minor accident, they told her to contact her guardian and apologizes for the surprise. Her mother is glad she wasn't hurt and asks what her husband said. She is referring to Jean Minchio since she mentioned her guardian. Now her legal guardian is her husband. Han Jia asks if her mother isn't her guardian anymore. She responds no, that in these cases, her husband is the guardian the doctors refer to, as now she is married and no longer under her parents. Her mother also says that in times like these, she should call her husband first, not her mother. The protagonist looks up guardian on the internet, and sees that a guardian doesn't necessarily mean parents. Shortly after, she hears someone calling her name. Jean Minchio arrives running, frantic, and asks if she's okay. Jia asks how he knew she was there, and Minchio says her mother told him. She then realizes her mother told him. Then, Jean Minchio sees the driver, becoming completely furious with him, because he identifies him as the one who hurt his wife. Seeing Minchio so serious like this scares the protagonist, even though she knew he could show that expression. The driver apologizes profusely in his imposing presence, while Jia tells him to calm down since nothing serious happened to her. After this, the doctor asks Mr. Guardian to calm down first, and then discuss his family member's condition, and Jia realizes that they are now family. Minchio asks if she really isn't feeling any pain, which makes her realize that he is worried and trying to comfort her in a difficult moment. Someone who's happy when she's happy, and sad when she's sad, Han Jia insists she's fine. However, she thinks that for others, this kind of relationship is considered normal, but she feels uncomfortable as she hasn't gotten used to it yet. Jean Minchio thinks her reaction is due to pain, but again Jia says she's fine and just suddenly felt a bit hungry. After that, she sent Minchio back to work. He would have liked to stay with her, but since she was really not in pain, she would leave normally as soon as the 4 was done. The conversation with the driver also ended well, with him apologizing profusely, feeling guilty. To be honest, Jia would have liked Jean Minchio to stay with her a little longer, but she didn't want to worry him again. She doesn't want to do that to him anymore. Just thinking about him being worried makes her feel upset. Soon, she gets up from the bed, even though the 4 process hasn't finished, and starts stretching, saying she needs to stay focused. The protagonist wants to focus on work for now, and she's going to do it step by step, starting with what she can do now. She knows the interview fell through, and since her goal is to make a living for the time being, even if it's just a short-term part-time job nearby. Lost in her thoughts, she suddenly runs into Na Yang-duk, and is surprised because he was the last person she expected to see now. He, in turn, just smiles at meeting her there. After chatting for a bit, Na Yang-duk learns that she fainted after being hit by a car, and remarks that writer Han Jia's life is truly varied, and asks where she is headed now, offering her a ride. In the past, the protagonist used to frequent a street where luxurious cars often passed by. And seeing them and hearing the noise they made, she would conclude that some people really lived well and wonder who they were. She also used to wonder what it would feel like to ride in one of those cars at least once. But now that she is experiencing it, she ends up having a different perspective. Na Young-duk asks why she is coughing. Jia says it's cold and asks him to close the hood. Besides, she's scared of him being behind the wheel. Now she knows what kind of person owns such a car. Duk laments about her asthma and says he should have dragged her with a different car. Jia just tells him to close the roof and is surprised that he has another vehicle. He says he has several because he rents them out. Now she understands and jokes that she thought he might have won the lottery or something. But with a cheap pickup line, he says he could say he won the lottery, and the prize is meeting her. The protagonist tells him to stop, reminding him she has told him countless times never to use such cheesy lines again. However, Na Young-duk says that she still liked it since she seemed impressed. Jia disagrees. Then, he asks why she's wearing formal clothes, wondering if it's for a special occasion. She replies that she was going to an interview and is preparing to get a well-paying job. Duk asks if she already spent all the money from her books. Jia replies that a lot has happened recently, so it seems like she's hit rock bottom. Na Young-duk seems pleased with that, saying that now she needs a way to make a living and will do any job, like a dog. However, she tells him there's no need for him to say that. Then she makes an obscene gesture, even though Duk says he hadn't even said anything yet. The protagonist knows he's going to ask her to write again, but he hesitates, thinking she might no longer be a writer, and asks if she'd be willing to work at a cafe since she's looking for paid work. Na Young-duk mentions that he knows someone who has a lot of money and runs a cafe as a hobby, with few customers, high pay, and asks if she's interested. Jia says it sounds suspicious and questions why they would hire with little customer flow and a high salary. Duk says it doesn't matter if it's strange, telling her just to go and work if she likes it. Whether to believe it or not is up to her, placing the choice in her hands. He also tells Jia to contact him after she's thought about it, and he can arrange an interview, advising her not to waste this opportunity. After some time, she thinks Na Young-duk's suggestion isn't a bad idea, but her pride stops her from accepting anything from him. However, as she walks a little further, she runs into Minchul and wonders why he's there. She also notices that he's wearing the same clothes he had on when he visited the hospital earlier, and wonders if he waited for her all this time, because he felt overwhelmed since she was at the hospital, and waited to go home with her. She feels happy about this, and calls out to Minchul from afar. Then she runs toward him, jumping to hug him around the waist. She bombards him with questions, asking if he just got off work, if the company said anything, and if he has already eaten. Jia notices his reaction was bad and asks if something is wrong with him. She stands still, waiting for an answer, but notices that many people around them are looking at them, concluding that it's bothering him. Still, she simply says that she was happy to see him. Minchul, in turn, reciprocates her affection, and gives Jia a hug. He says he tried to call her but couldn't reach her, so he was worried. Jia suddenly remembers that she put her phone on silent for the interview and forgot to take it off. Minchul also mentions that earlier at the hospital, he was worried too, whether she was in pain or not. She insists again that she was fine, and that he didn't need to worry. It bothers her to be watched by so many people now. Minchul wants to hold her in his arms just a little longer, and he prolongs it as much as he can. As expected, the protagonist thinks she is right about his concern. Minchul says he would have preferred if she hadn't overburdened herself, and he affirms that she can rely on him a little more. Jia thinks Minchul is very kind, and, as expected, she didn't want to see his worried face. Compared to that, her pride is nothing, so she says he shouldn't worry about it because she got a job. Being honest, Jia says that someone she knows recommended it and asked her to give it a chance, and if it weren't for that person, she wouldn't have done something like this. Then she states that her boring life as an unemployed person has come to an end and that she will start working the next day. She also says she thinks it's a good idea to have a small party to celebrate the end of her unemployment. She also asks if she can have her cheat day just for today, and Minchul agrees. Looking at his expression, she concludes that she likes his smiling face more than his worried one. She asks if she can drink alcohol as well. Minchul asks what will happen to her diet, and Jia says she will choose something calorie-free. The next day, she has the interview. With a coffee on the table, Jia is surprised by the interviewer, who says she is surprised Jia arrived on time, as she thought she would be late. Soon the woman asks the protagonist if they can finally start the interview. The story so far shows that Jia lived a typical life, not much different from others. But one day, she suddenly realized how important work was. Many companies scouted her, but none seemed like the right path for her. While she was contemplating, she ended up being scouted by her senior from a previous job. Her resume shows that she even dropped out of college and worked in a call center for 2 years as an entry advisor. She also has extensive experience in long-term part-time jobs. Apart from that, no other special qualifications. Han Jia never imagined that when that guy said he would introduce her to a fun part-time job, it would be something like this, and she did suspect something was off, because the cafe owner he mentioned is an old friend. Yeonju asks what her problem is, and questions if she is feeling well. The protagonist thinks that if Na Yang-duk knew it would be like this, he could at least have given her a heads up, but he isn't the type of person who would do that. She doesn't know what to do, as she hasn't talked to Yeonju in a long time and suddenly shows up shamelessly asking for a job. However, Yeonju tells her not to be nervous. She also says that if she didn't want to hire her, she wouldn't have called her for the interview. She mentions as well that their relationship is so comfortable that Jia didn't even touch up her hair roots. And, after cutting communication for years, she shows up out of nowhere asking for a job. With that, the protagonist thinks that Yeonju's way of rubbing salt in the wound hasn't changed. Yeonju, in turn, says she didn't think she would see her again like this. Anyway, she looked at Jia's resume, and realized Jia is married. Yeonju is shocked by this, and even adjusts her glasses, to see if she read it wrong. Then she is surprised that Han Jia got married. During the protagonist's college years, Choy Yeonju was the only person with whom she had good memories. Jia, who never wanted to do anything, started to think that ambitious people are cool. With only 2 completed novels and 3 drama titles, Yeonju has never failed since her debut. Unlike Jia, who debuted purely by luck, Yeonju is someone the protagonist sincerely acknowledges as a writer, and now she is her boss. The fact that Han Jia is married makes Yeonju laugh out loud. The protagonist asks if it is that funny. Yeonju says yes. The kid who read web novels in her room every night while scratching her belly got married. She can't imagine it, and she asks if Jia's husband is a neighborhood friend and how they got married. Jia doesn't know and says it just happened. Yeonju asks if she is really married. To answer, Jia shows a photo on her phone. Soon she realizes she is being treated much more amicably than she thought she would be. The protagonist thought it would be awkward since they hadn't seen each other in years, but she ended up talking to Yeonju as if it hadn't been long since they last met. Yeonju didn't have such a sociable personality in the past, but now she savors the fruits of her success. Her sudden aura makes Jia uneasy. Yeonju asks if she is bothered by the air conditioning or something like that, but Jia responds that it's just very bright, adding that Yeonju still says strange things out of nowhere. The protagonist asks if it's really okay for them to be doing this. Yeonju asks what she is referring to. Jia says it's about being her employee, mentioning full-time work, unemployment insurance, weekly holidays, and asks if it's fine for her to decide on all of this so quickly. However, as the owner, Yeonju affirms there is nothing wrong, and in any case, she's setting up this establishment as a hobby. This makes Jia think she's a goddess. After that, Yeonju says they will start on Monday, and Jia says goodbye, agreeing that everything is fine, and before leaving, she gives her friend a smile, saying it was nice to see her again, and thanking her for the opportunity. With a gentle smile, Yeonju says goodbye, and tells her there's no need to thank her, just to get home safely. A while later, the rat's ears perk up. As Jin Mincheol arrives home, he ends up coming across Jia celebrating with loud music. Mincheol doesn't understand her behavior, but Jia explains that she got hired, and that's why she's celebrating. Our video ends here. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, bye bye.